across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Lots to come this afternoon. 3 minutes after 1, more than 40 Labour MPs have called for the introduction of digital ID so that the government can get a grip on illegal immigration and make it easier for people to access public services. What's not to like? Is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? Oh, we'll have more on that in just a bit. Also this afternoon, Health Secretary Wes Streeting has slammed one of Labour's biggest union backers, that's Unite, over Birmingham's bin strike, calling it a public health risk with rats and vermin crawling all over the place and branding their blockade of bin lorries as totally unacceptable. Fair play to the Health Secretary. But is there an end to this extraordinary, filthy story? And Chancellor Rachel Reeves has told UK businesses, we've got your backs after Donald Trump's tariffs rattled the markets, vowing in Parliament to act decisively to protect working people. If Boomerang Rach says it, then it's got to be right, surely. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. And here's the thing. If you have a problem in the 21st century, there is ultimately only one solution. Whatever the issue, whatever the hurdle, regardless of how challenging and difficult a dilemma it might be, there is only one answer to all of your prayers and problems. Go digital. Yeah. Digital is king. It's new, it's exciting, it is progressive. It will solve problems like nothing else. It'll make decisions fast. It will streamline and simplify your life, from banking to bookings, shopping to admin. The digital world is your best friend. What is not to like? It's so good, this digital thing, that the cool cats over there at Immigration HQ have been taking a look into how the D word could change the face of the I word, immigration. It could be about to get a makeover, meaning we can catch those pesky illegals with breathtaking speed. They won't even consider hiring a boat from Calais because they'll be databased and digitalised before they can say, one-way trip, please, monsieur. It's that simple. 40 Labour MPs have called for the introduction of digital ID so that the government can get a grip on illegal immigration and make it easier for people to access public services. Now, 3 of these Labour groups, there's the Labour Growth Group, the Red Wall Group and the Blue Labour Group, they've all called on the government to introduce a new form of digital identification. Now, you may remember, I'm about to use the T word here, Tony and Blair. The former PM has repeatedly called on the government to introduce digital ID cards to control immigration and ensure we know exactly who is here. So these MPs have knocked out an open letter. They've said that digital ID would help target off-the-books employment, the black market economy, and allow people to seamlessly engage with the NHS and other public services. They've warned that countries around the world are leaving us behind in this area, highlighting similar schemes in the European Union and in India, where they're apparently going rather big on digital ID. Polling by YouGov suggests that the measure is supported by 6 in 10 voters. Well, 6 in 10. Would you go for this? Is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? You see, the problem with all of these areas, and I think even Blair himself, when he was pushed on that question of privacy and governmental invasion, incursions into our private life, etc., I think he conceded that, yeah, there is a bit of that, but the payoff is monumental. Everything is easier. Services are better to access. You're kind of connected up through the system, and that makes life brilliant because everything is on the digital ID, and ultimately everything will be on the digital ID, from your medical records, your driving history, etc. If you've got any dicey points on your licence, and all manner of other issues, your tax status, are you up to date, are you in debt? I mean, you know where it can go ultimately. You haven't got to watch many episodes of Black Mirror to get an idea that there is good reason. I mean, genuinely, you haven't got to be a tinfoil hat wearer. Good reason to go, well, maybe this is something that, because it's irreversible, right? So once you open that particular door and go down that route of databasing digitally in a way that we have never done before, you can't go back on that. And you do what looks like unthinkable now could very easily become the norm. And things that organisations or governments would say, oh, no, the privacy is there, no one can access it, you can't just look at it and, whenever you fancy and see what someone's up to. But that's now. I mean, you could have a change of government that has a very different idea, or they can modify the rules and regs surrounding digital ID. That's what undoubtedly will happen. But the point here is that it will solve the migrant crisis, because everyone will be digitalised, and therefore no one's going to be able to just suddenly take on a moody job in the dark or the black economy, because the black economy can't exist. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure you will ever completely circumnavigate illegality in this area for people who don't want to be found. I'm sure there's always going to be ways around that. So you could still make the journey from Calais. When you arrive at the other end, what would happen? Would you be digitalised once you arrive? How would they do that? Would they just give you a card? What happens if you lose your card and then go and see your mate who delivers food for a living on the back of a dicey moped? Just go and see him, he'll get you a job. I can't quite see how it solves the problem. We'll talk to one of the people that penned the letter, a Labour MP, in just a little bit. Also, James Melville, who has for a long time, he's a friend of the show, friend of the station, for a long time been campaigning or warning of the potential dangers of digital ID. We'll get James's take on this as well. And over to you. Is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? If somebody said to you, let's go digital in the ID department, specifically with ID and all that goes with it, and it will solve the migrant crisis. Yeah, you're buying into that? 0344 499 1000. I mean, here's the thing, by the way. You don't need digital ID to solve the migrant crisis. I think that's the wider issue, that the governments and those that are singing from the rafters that this is the way forward, that's potentially the bit they've missed. We will ask and pick the brains of the Labour MP in just a little bit. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Candice Holdsworth, the writer and broadcaster, is back with us. Candice, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
All good at this end. Nice to have you back with us. Let's start with that story then. Over 40 Labour MPs urging the use of digital ID to tackle illegal migration, they say, and improve access to public services. Let's listen to the man who's been advocating this for years, Tony Blair. He says digital IDs are the way forward. Here's what he said.
I am constantly saying to my own party, Labour Party, which will probably win this election, you've got to focus on this technology revolution. It's not an afterthought. It's the single biggest thing that's happening in the world today of a real world nature that is going to change everything. Leave aside all the geopolitics and the conflicts and war and America, China, all the rest of it. This revolution is going to change everything about our society, our economy, the way we live, the way we interact with each other.
I mean, that's meant to be the positive news from Tony Blair, Candice. I mean, he's saying, what's not to like, essentially.
Yes, I like the way that they frame it as, and this is going to be the future.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, you're going to get left behind. I mean, we're going to get left behind by all these countries who are going to steam ahead of us. And you think, well, which countries? Are they free societies? Are they democratic societies? Do people have liberal individual rights like they do here? These are ancient liberties that people really value in this country. And just because something's new doesn't mean it's good. I mean, the fact that we have something like Magna Carta that stretches back 1,000 years, that's still very meaningful. It's not some anachronistic, horrible idea. The sorts of values that we have, that we're not a papers, please society, that's very deeply embedded.
Sure.
And I think our digital IDs would 100% change the relationship between citizens and the state. Because, I mean, practically, you think about it, the state then keeps this enormous database of everyone in the country. A bureaucracy exists to examine it. I mean, that is quite sinister when you think about it in terms of surveillance. And I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in any way. I mean, I just look at this purely philosophically. It's one of the things that I love about this country, that people resist that sort of overweening by the state.
And I can't work out what's in it for us. I mean, all right, OK, so your digital ID, you jump on an aeroplane and if I don't know, maybe you've forgotten your ticket, you won't be able to forget your ticket if you look at it in that respect, because everything will be zinced in to your ID. So doubtless there'll be a couple of moments in your life where you go, oh, right, that was quite useful. But generally speaking, this is more useful for governments than it is for citizens by a country mile.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is it's like the very specific case that the Labour MPs have laid out. It's to deal with criminality. But you're absolutely right. For ordinary citizens, I can't really see what it offers us. I mean, we already have forms of ID that we can use when we need them. Though I will say that I think that there is a lot of thinking, especially in technological circles, that is the way that we're moving. People are going to live increasingly digital lives online, and you'll have algorithms which will optimize all sorts of aspects of your life. So they'll manage your health, for instance. They'll manage your finances. And I think that's what Tony Blair is talking about when he's talking about the future, because I know he's very interested in artificial intelligence as well. And, you know, you've got that health guru in the US. I don't know if you've heard of him, Brian Johnson, the guy who's trying to...
Yeah, he wants to live forever, doesn't he?
Yeah, and so his whole argument is my brain won't make my choices for me, the algorithm will. So that's sort of what a lot of people are imagining. Of course, you know, you don't need to have read much science fiction to think, well, how could that go wrong? How could that go wrong? I mean, that could become very sinister very quickly.
And again, governments probably would relish this kind of thing. It's not been really taken up, though, by Starmer. This group of 40 Labour MPs are really echoing the words of Tony Blair. We're going to speak to one of them in around about 20 minutes' time. His name is Jake Richards. He's the Labour MP from Rother Valley, member of the Home Affairs Select Committee. He's going to join us to put some meat on the bones and maybe convince us, after all, Candice, that you and I are barking up the wrong tree and we should embrace this thing.
I know, but maybe we're just like old liberals. And I just, you know, maybe there's been a bit of a value shift, and maybe some people just think, well, that's not important.
Yeah.
You know, people often say that, and they used to say that about CCTV. Well, if you haven't done anything wrong, then why do you care? And you're sort of making the argument philosophically that actually, no, I don't like that shift. But if people think, well, I prefer efficiency over individuality, then, you know, you can see how these, you know, Labour MPs or people in politics can make the argument, and it becomes harder to oppose it. Yeah,
and if you haven't done anything wrong, you've got nothing to hide and all that business. I mean, that's just an argument to point a camera at everybody's front door, isn't it? I mean, why would that bother you? You've done nothing wrong. Just have a camera looking into your house 24/7. Although we have opted, I suppose, voluntarily to stick cameras on our own house looking the other way through doorbell technology. But maybe that's another story. Let's look to this one. Rachel Reeves says, "We have your backs." This is reference Donald Trump's tariff. He's insisted, of course, there will be no relief on those tariffs. He's demanded that China backs down from the trade war. Let's have a listen to him speaking about those tariffs yesterday.
When they look at the fact that we have $1 billion trade deficit, when you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country, but with China it's $1 trillion. And we have to solve our trade deficit with China. We have $1 trillion trade deficit with China. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China.
There it is. Is that the way to address it? And is Rachel Reeves right to say she can, well, have your back?
I think she's made herself a prisoner to events. I mean, she's just put herself in such a rigid position. You know, these very thin margins she's got with her headroom and her fiscal rules. I mean, something uncertain and very volatile comes along like this, although it wasn't totally unforeseen. People knew there was going to be a trade war. I mean, she knew that we were entering into a time of economic uncertainty, and it puts her in a difficult position. You know, she's raised taxes before we've achieved growth. So that doesn't leave her in a good position. It's either, so she slashes the state, and that makes her very unpopular with Labour MPs, or she raises taxes.
Yeah.
And obviously, ordinary people are just like, we can't take any more taxes. I mean, they've raised taxes on business, and business are like, you are squeezing us. Plus, with all this macroeconomic uncertainty, it's making it even harder to do business. So what does she have left? What moves on the chessboard can she make? I don't think she's got many.
No, I don't think she has any at all. And I don't, I'm not suggesting we're the only country to be sort of battling or trying to find our way around this tariff story. There's a lot of very hardened Republicans in the United States who can't get their head around it either. I saw some people tweeting about this, those that you would call about as right-wing Republicans it gets, saying, we didn't vote for this. But nonetheless, some would say, well, actually, Trump did say tariffs was his favourite word. He made no doubt about it, that pretty early on in his administration, he would start employing tariff policies when it comes to trading with nearly every country on the planet. So it's not new news, this.
It's not. I mean, I remember I was discussing it over a month ago, and we were saying, what is the outcome of this going to be? What does this mean for free trade? What is Britain's position in this? Are we going to, dig into a free trading position, which we have a long history of, sort of championing free trade? None of this was unforeseen. I just think with everything that's going on right now, I just wonder who will blink first. I mean, China's, I think, picked up that America is taking an increasingly adversarial position towards it. And it's said twice now, we will not back down from a fight. Yeah. It just depends who has more leverage. Who can be hit harder by this.
True. Listen, Candy, stay with us. We're back with more stories from Candice Holdsworth in just a couple of moments' time. That question is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? Well, 40 Labour MPs think it could be. We'll chat to one of them in just a bit, although Cliff in Berkshire does say quite reasonably, if anything Tony Blair thinks is great, I don't want. Would it not be necessary to do away with cash in order to make the digital IDs work the way they want it to? Yeah, 100%. There would be no cash in the natural extension of that journey. You wouldn't need any of that. And this seems to be the kind of argument that it kind of rids the world of lots of bureaucracy. It simplifies all the systems that we live within and therefore makes life easy. But that spectacularly omits the huge recalibration of a citizen's relationship with its government. And governments are not there to track people, to monitor people, to make algorithms based on an individual's behaviour. That should never be the role of government in a democratic society. 100%, a 10-year-old could work that out. And that's what's central to all of this. 0344 499 1000. Your thoughts on that story. More from Candice on the way. It's 1:20. This is Talk.
match against one of these players, Harriet Haynes, 18 months ago. And this player, Haynes, who was born male, has been cleaning up the prize money. And now there's another one, Lucy Smith, coming up close behind. So the organisers in pool know this is a problem. The problem they've got is they've been threatened by both sides. So they actually adopted a proper female category in the summer of 2023. And then this player, Harriet Haynes, who's male, threatened them with legal action.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 1. No name on this one, but says, good afternoon. I grew up abroad in Israel and Germany. Both have ID cards. It's a security lifesaver, especially regarding terror threats in a country like Israel. Even Germany, who experienced the East German Stasi in its terror network, these days have ID cards. They're also, as a kind of an additional lighter point, a great way to stop the craziness of post-selling gig tickets. Each ticket you buy is allocated to a name, and when entering a gig you have to bring your ID card with you. It's stopped the ridiculous on-selling of tickets. Lots of positive sides to it. I'm all for it. Have a great afternoon. I think the difference is there's a difference between an ID card and a digital ID card. I guess that's the point. Digital ID is an ID card with booster rockets attached to it. When I was a kid, I remember a French kid showing us on a trip to France with the school their ID card, and it was like just a piece of, essentially a bit of card, you know, before plastic kind of credit card size things. Today, that of course would have other implications to it, but digital ID goes much further. It goes into everything. You know, your water rates are in there. Everything you pay for, every transaction you make, every move you make could be, if need be, traced. Now, you can do a little bit of that already on your mobile phone, but this is sort of new territory. I think that's the suggestion, but thank you for that text anyway. Candice Holdsworth is with us. We are talking the big stories of the day, including this one from Wes Streeting, Candice, the Health Secretary. He's attacked one of Labour's biggest union backers over that bin strike that has left rats and vermin crawling around Birmingham. Let's have a listen to one resident on Talk this morning speaking about the extent of the problem.
I haven't heard of anyone coming to pick anything up. Honestly, it's been the same for a couple weeks. Right. This is our recycling bin over here, and it's been full like that since maybe February, like beginning of February.
That's one of the locals over there in Birmingham experiencing the problem, Candice. I mean, this is terrible what is happening at the moment. And Wes Streeting, quite rightly, has attacked the unions, going, hang on a second, you can't stop bin lorries trying to pick this stuff up. 17,000 tonnes of it.
I feel so sorry for the people of Birmingham. They've just been put through so much. I mean, there's this going on, but then it was the council declaring bankruptcy. So all their rates went up, but their services didn't improve. I mean, they're just being treated horribly. I mean, this is what is going on now with a lot of local councils and management of local delivery services. They're treating people like fools, and they get caught up in these battles, and no one cares. And it's good to see Wes Streeting be critical of the unions. My only issue is I just don't think Labour has grappled with them enough. I mean, Labour's been incredibly soft with them. I mean, there was that deal negotiated with the transport unions, for instance, which was good for the unions, absolutely terrible for commuters and people who actually used the train services. There was no upside for them whatsoever. And as many critics of Bridget Phillipson's school reforms say, I mean, this is just what the unions want. This is good for the teachers. It's not good for the pupils. And it's like that with so many things. You know, the people who these things are meant to serve are just left behind. Their interests are not considered.
Yeah, not at all. This story as well. First child in Britain born from a womb transplant. We transplant a lot of things these days. Lungs and heart, that's old hat. But even hands can be transplanted. Now wombs. One baby, the first baby is Amy Isabel Davidson, the first kid to be born following a womb transplant donated by the mother's sister.
This is a fascinating story. I find this so interesting. I wonder, though, if it is a it's not something that could be widely used because I think she was born with a very rare condition. She had a womb missing from birth.
Yeah.
And to have a womb transplanted into your body, that's a really invasive procedure. The chances of it taking, I don't know what that is. I mean, I'm sure that there is a failure rate for organ transplants, like with all organ transplants. She had it from her sister, who presumably is quite genetically similar to her, as is the same with like kidney transplants and things like that. I wonder if IVF, though, for most women who are struggling with fertility issues, would be the best option because it's just not as invasive as a womb transplant.
Yeah, I don't know what the risk factor is in medical world, but I would imagine like any operation or medical procedure, it's significant. And something like this had no guarantee that it was going to work, but it clearly did. So, good news all around. And there's a little baby that was born as a result, safe and well. Finally, this one. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, urged to take action over crack cocaine users on London Underground. If you're watching this in vision, you'll be able to see this little image now of a little old crackhead. There he is. Look, bless him, like doing his gear. Oh, look, a child walks past straight into the fog of his crack dispensing pipe. I mean, that's where we're at, Candice, at the moment. This is in public. This is like broad daylight. Nobody's hiding it.
I know. The thing is, though, I've been travelling on the tube for years and I've seen drug use like this before. Not with smoke, but I've seen people taking drugs. I mean, I saw a guy snorting cocaine, like a big thing of cocaine in front of people, brazenly on a tube carriage. And no one does anything. Everyone just sits there because they don't know what to do. And you don't know who to call either. There are transport police around, but they're not on the tube carriage with you. And I do wonder if maybe we do need to start enforcing higher standards in these contexts, because there was a child there, and I just think in so many other countries, there would have been physical violence. People here are quite polite, they're restrained, they don't tend to get physical very quickly, but I can think of a number of way more conservative countries where that would not be tolerated.
No, it absolutely
would
wouldn't.
not be.
But it's just down that long list of weird stuff that people do, and maybe it's just others would say, well, it's a mental health crisis we're dealing with here. The stuff you see people do on tubes. One of our colleagues here, who will remain nameless, not that long ago saw a fella sitting opposite her with his trousers open. How can I put this delicately? Tickling Yoda behind the ears.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I've seen stuff like that in public before as well, and it's clear that this person, is enjoying it, they're taunting people. There needs to be much stronger penalties for things like this. They really, really do. You should not be able to get away with doing that. But I think that people have sort of lost faith in the transport police or ordinary police to do something about that sort of behaviour, that sort of very disturbing behaviour that degrades the public sphere and makes us all just feel like things are sort of spinning out of control a bit.
100%. And on that point, that profound point, Candice, thank you. Always good to have you on, Candice Holdsworth, with us on the programme. We're going to cross over, speak to one of the Labour MPs who has put this letter together looking for digital ID to be introduced into this country with a specific view that it will help address and tackle illegal migration. Would it do that? And if it did, would you support it? We'll also talk to James Melville, who has been warning for years about this kind of stuff. Details on the way. It's 1:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 1:30. This comes in from Graham, who says anyone who objects to ID cards must have something to hide. ID cards would save the NHS millions. It would also mean that illegal immigrants would struggle to disappear into the black economy, but they should only carry basic info, not health or criminal data. And that almost identifies the problem, Graham, is that where do they go? You know, what is the criteria? And if the government today says, right, OK, we're not going to have health and criminal details on it, what about the next government? Because they might go, actually, it'd be rather useful if we did that. Gary says digital ID would be the one-off chance to carry out an audit of the UK population. Properly resourced, it could be rolled out over a couple of years, and after that, it won't be difficult to zero in on all the people living here illegally, because life here could be pretty much impossible without one. If life is impossible for illegal immigrants, we won't have to throw them out. They would leave voluntarily. That's an interesting point as well. But will the dark economy, the grey economy, the black economy, is there a pecking order of dubious economies? I don't know. Would they all carry on regardless? Let's find out a little bit more about this. More than 40 Labour MPs urging the government to introduce digital ID. They say it would tackle illegal migration. It would improve public services. As one of our contributors just said, supporters argue digital ID would modernise immigration controls, reduce benefit fraud and streamline processes like NHS bookings and passport renewals. Polling by YouGov suggests that the move is supported by 6 in 10 voters. Are you part of the 6 or are you part of the 4? While the government plans to roll out smartphone passports and e-driving licences by 2027, it has rejected mandatory digital ID, saying it's focused on tackling the small boat crossings in other ways. Let's speak to Jake Richards, Labour MP for Rother Valley, member of the Home Affairs Select Committee and one of the architects of this proposal. I think I'm right in saying, Jake, good afternoon to you. Oh, in fact, we're speaking to I do apologise, James Melville. James Melville, can I just say, James, you're definitely not a Labour MP, all right? Just in case anyone thinks you might have, you know, just slightly crossed over.
I've never been so shocked on Talk in my entire life to be introduced as a Labour MP. I think I need some digital ID myself.
I think so. Let's do the intro in a different way. Let's speak to the well-known socialist James Melville, everybody. Here he is, everyone's friend. We've been talking about this for years, James, digital ID. And like all of these things, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, they're always sold in very positive ways, you know, in a kind of, you know, what's not to like kind of way. You know, do you want to reduce crime? Yep. Do you want to tackle illegal immigration? Yep. Do you want NHS waiting lists to be easier to penetrate and move forwards? Yeah. Well, therefore, have digital ID. It's the answer to all of our problems.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Tony Blair in particular has been wanging on about this for quite some time in different forms, different guises. I mean, we saw this manifest itself obviously over COVID, where there's different forms of that, resulting in the illiberal, so-called liberal idea of vaccine passports, which was a form of digital ID. So it's been around. I mean, they do go down the auspice of safety and convenience a lot with this stuff, but you're right. I mean, it's where do we stop with this? You know, you've got a solution, in inverted commas, for illegal migration, but there's other things. You know, there's obviously health. There's obviously aspects to do with carbon and net zero. There's aspects to do with crime, voter registration, and so on. So it does seem to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And the problem I've got with this is the point that you mentioned. Different governments will use this potentially in different ways. And I think when we go down the route of government-controlled digital ID, it's government overreach. Where does it end?
Well, that's it, isn't it? Where does it end? And our relationship as citizens with the state, it's very important that we establish what that should look like. And if you have essentially handed over the full might of your private life to an administration, to the government, then to me, that is an overreach. That is completely obliterating what our system should look like, our relationship with our political masters, if you like.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're supposed to serve, not snoop and surveil. I mean, there's different components of this. I mean, how much information do they take? We've also got, for instance, aspects of legislation going through in terms of digitalization at the moment and data capture and potentially data harvesting as well. So it seems to me that the governments are no longer serving, but they're taking our information. And where does that information actually go? And how far do they then roll out with other aspects of acquiring that information? There's other things that are attached to this as well. For instance, the slow moves around the world for central bank digital currencies. It's still another form in some way of digital ID. And so, yes, the technology's there, but at the same time, at what do we give up in terms of our privacy, where our data goes, who's actually looking after it as well, and what procurement contracts are in place? And I would suggest that going back to the original problem here of migration, maybe they should be looking at deterrence. That's not ruling out immigration. Economic immigration is a good thing in a lot of ways. But in terms of illegal migration and what's happening in the Channel, the cost of hotels, they should be looking at wider deterrence, but not, in effect, a deterrent on us in terms of potentially losing some of our own privacy, our own rights, and also where does that information go?
Indeed. And I mean, the idea that the only way to solve the Channel migrant crisis, which is just one component of migration, of course, the idea that the only way to do that is by having a plastic digital card, I mean, is nonsense. There's loads of... If they really wanted to solve that problem, they could solve it in many different ways. But I guess, James, with the invasion and the privacy angle and the Big Brother kind of angle on this, Tony Blair did say, because he's been wanging on about this forever, I don't know quite why. I mean, if I was Blair, I'd be laying in a hammock in Barbados, keeping me gob shut, sipping pina coladas with 20 Marlborough Gold on the side. I wouldn't be worried about what's going on elsewhere in the world. He's been there, seen it, done it. But he can't leave it alone, this one. And, you do wonder who the hell he's working for, because he whenever he gets the chance to wheel this one out, he will do. But he did, in fairness, he did in one of the interviews concede that, you do have to hand over a bit of your privacy. It will mean we recalibrate the relationship between citizen and government, but it's worth it because of all of the advantages.
Yeah, but, it comes back again to that advantages in inverted commas, safety and convenience. Whenever I hear those words from a government, I shudder, because recent track records suggest the opposite. It feels to me about aspects of power grip, and I know some of this is connected back into COVID, where there was a hell of a lot of overreach with that, and digital was a component of that. And so here we are again, another problem. The government or various MPs offer a potential solution, and quite often that solution is the same solution. Digital ID. Now, this poses a lot of questions about how is it enforced, what information do they actually get, what happens to our individual digital footprint and identification, who is actually getting the contracts. And for me, it also, again, it's a whiff of procurement, massive contracts on taxpayers' expense, and coming up with a solution that might appeal to a particular type of audience who's concerned about this issue. And that seems to be the trick with digital ID. It's appealing to different audiences on different issues. So if, for instance, you've got an issue on, climate, and you're focusing on net zero, well, digital ID might be the solution. Same with health and safety on COVID, and now in terms of migration with this. It's pitching at different audiences. It's a very clever game that they're playing. But ultimately, how clever will be the solution once it's rolled out? And in effect, what does that mean for our own privacy?
Yeah, spot on. James, great to have you on as ever. Thank you, James Melville, social and political commentator. Not a Labour MP, I should say, but we will speak to Jake Richards, the Labour MP for Rother Valley, in just a moment, because he's very much behind this idea. He sees this through the other end of the telescope, if you like. Over to you as well. Is digital ID the answer, specifically to the migrant crisis, all the other elements that go with it as well? Comments on that too. And, of course, more from you as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk.
sheer number of petty criminals, thieves, mobile phone thefts, all that sort of thing, the sheer number of people who commit crimes almost every day and simply don't get sentences of this long. Real bread and butter stuff, the stuff that you learn when you're in primary school or when you're a toddler. You don't take things that don't belong to you, you don't break things that don't belong to you, you don't attack people for no good reason, often not even for a good reason. Those people are the ones that are not going to prison at all. But as you say, somebody who sent a tweet, well, an example must be made of that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So let's go back to the digital ID story. 40 Labour MPs urging the government to introduce digital ID to tackle illegal migration, also to improve public services. Jake Richards is one of the architects. I think I'm right in saying, Jake, good afternoon to you, by the way, of this initiative. You're urging the government to adopt this. Previous leaders of the Labour Party, namely Tony Blair, of course, have been saying this for years. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any movement from the front bench, shall we say.
Look, the point actually is that the government is already doing a lot of this. So the government has already announced that driving licence will be digitalised over the next few years. Similar initiatives in terms of e-visas, in terms of passports. So look, we know that government generally is becoming more digital. Technology is going to be playing a vital role in how we deliver public services. What we're calling for is to make sure that when it comes to digital ID, there is a comprehensive and joined up approach to this so that we can really reap the rewards as a country. And look, we can look across the world and see other countries are quite a few steps ahead of us in Europe, but also in America, India, and we need to learn from them, and otherwise we'll be left behind.
Some would say, well, look, OK, there are things, as you rightly say, in place, and they're increasing. You mentioned, quite rightly, driving licences and the like, but a kind of one-size-fits-all package, whether it's in your phone or on a card, that has all the bells and whistles attached, that takes it into the Premier League of digital ID, right? And there are naturally and understandably some reservations about that, namely privacy.
Look, presumably there'd be privacy concerns anyway. I accept there, of course, we have to be very careful when we're talking about individuals' data, individuals' identification, about how we protect people's privacy. That conversation needs to be had. But let's not pretend this is not already happening. You know, the public sector is already taking more of our data. The private sector do it more and more. We're much more used to sharing that data with third parties than we used to be. And I just want the government to take advantage of that. And I want the government to take advantage of that, to do good things like improve public services, make the NHS more tailored, have a better education system, have a welfare system which cuts out fraud and offers more targeted support. This is all possible if we embrace this digital ID era that we're going into anyway. And my concern is that although government is starting to move in this direction, unless we take a more comprehensive and ambitious approach, we won't reap the rewards that are possible.
The issue around the relationship between the citizen and the government, it's an important one. You know that. You're a man, as I understand it, read history at that dodgy polytechnic in Oxford. And so you know your way around the chronology of this world. And clearly not every government is as democratic as the next one or the one before it. There's obvious points within our past where we can look to and say, you know, there are bad forces out there, whether that comes in the form of hacking from another country. We know that that's already out there, whether it's just in a change of government that has very different ideas about the implication of digital ID. All of these things are clearly up there to be debated. Is there any part of you that's concerned about that?
We always have to have protections, but I think there is a bit of a misnomer about this digital ID issue, that it is the government necessarily that takes all the data and is in control of your identification and things like that, this kind of scary dystopia, which I don't think is the reality. If you look at a country like Estonia, what they're actually doing is giving the citizen much more power over what data the state can access and for what reasons, so that the citizen themselves can really track exactly how they are working with and dealing with the public services. And that's a much better way of doing it. This, in my view, is less about giving government power and more about empowering the citizen to access the public services that they need, that they want, to share the data with the right appropriate public services and different parts of government as and when they need to, but perhaps not all the time. So in my view, this is about being smart, it's about better government, but ultimately it's about giving control back to citizens rather than to big corporations or to government, in fact.
And that is the issue, though, isn't it? Is that inevitably, and I think I mentioned Tony Blair at the beginning when he's talked about this, he did concede that it does give governments a little more of you than previously, but his argument is that's a kind of a price worth paying.
It's only a price if the citizen wants to pay it. And the best digital ID systems give that control to the citizen. But the reality is, in the 21st century, in 2025, we share our data, most of us share our data with private sector organisations and public sector organisations every single minute almost. We're on our phone to do our shopping. We sign up for social media sites which send us adverts and algorithms that know what we want. We're in a different era to when this debate last surfaced back in the early noughties around the ID card debate. Yeah. We're in a completely different era. And I just think that people need to and do accept that the benefits of that, as long as it's done safely with a safe framework and appropriate regulation, are really something to be that can really change the way that government works for the better.
But it would have to be, you couldn't do it half measures, could you? You'd have to go full on with this. I mean, if I know one of the aspects that is mentioned with yourself and your other colleagues that are supporting this is that it would solve, or at least begin the process of solving, illegal immigration. My question there is, would it though? Because, those that lurk in the dark economy or the grey economy will do so regardless, won't they?
Well, there's a few things here, and I don't think anyone is saying that this is going to solve the issue of illegal immigration, or indeed any of the challenges we face on its own. It doesn't solve it. But I think when it comes to illegal immigration, it can do a few things. One, it can help us counter, for example, illegal work, which is a big issue when we counter illegal immigration. But two, and perhaps most importantly, in my view, it will give people a better sense of fairness in the system. If we have a digital ID system whereby we know what citizens are entitled to, whether they're entitled to access public services or benefits, or what the status is of their right to live in this country, then we will have more faith in the system. At the moment, the system is so complex, our welfare system, our immigration system, our public services are stretched, that we really don't know exactly who has the right and who doesn't have the right to access different types of services, or at least people don't feel like they do. And I think a form of digital ID would help confront that a bit. But I'm not for a minute, and I know some of the headlines around this letter today have sort of suggested this will solve illegal immigration. I'm afraid that's the license of the headline writer rather than the actual content of the letter. But this is part of what we think is a solution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you were here illegally and then, I don't know, had a terrible accident, needed to go to A&E, you're still going to get treated, aren't you? No one's going to go, oh, you haven't got digital ID, so therefore...
Well, because we have an NHS which has made that decision to treat people, one that I would agree with. I don't think... Yeah. But there are other much more complex cases, which I think where we would have, for example, access to benefits, access to housing, where if we have a better sense of who has the right to access some of these services, I think that will give people more faith in our control systems.
We will see. Jake, thank you for coming on with us. Really appreciate that. Jake Richards is the Labour MP for Rother Valley, member of the Home Affairs Select Committee. He's one of the 40 MPs that are urging the government to introduce digital ID to tackle all sorts of issues. It could have an effect on illegal immigration. He's saying they're not quite as the headline writers have put it, but it would have an effect. And all the other access to services that you might want. Tom says we spent 40 billion on digital track and trace shambles already. The digital ID will be the same waste of time, says Tom in Edinburgh. Others are arguing here that there are countries around the world, big economies, that are putting this in place. And if we don't put it in place, we're going to be left behind. The bit I'm struggling with is to see how are we left behind as citizens? Governments might be left behind. There might be, an issue that, you haven't got your driving licence connected to your digital ID. Does that that might be a problem for the state. Is it a problem for the individual? Simon in Northamptonshire. On this point, Simon, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Just to kind of like say my dog in the fight here, I used to live in Singapore and I lived there for 2 years. This was nearly 20 years ago.
Yep.
And they had a very similar system. It wasn't digital, but if you carried a card and you had what was called, I think it was a FIN number it was called on there, you had to present that if you wanted to buy any major purchase, say like a computer, a mobile phone, a SIM card. So that's how they tackled the system with organised crime, and which I think where it could be a benefit to solving the immigration. I don't think that's the sole reason we should do it, just having lived in a society where you have this. And it would be the same as an NI number. You get an identifier number that's unique to you. You want to do anything to be a productive member of that society, get a job, rent a property, get utilities, you needed this number. You didn't have it, and I tried it a few times. Like, right, can I buy a SIM card? No, you haven't got your card with you.
Wow.
We're not going to do that for you. If we did that in the UK, if we completely upended the way the immigration system worked, and we had anyone can come into the country, that's fine. You go into the waiting list, but you are automatically not housed, not given money. You are expected to have anyone that is inviting you over here support you, and then being found out if actually I'm an illegal migrant, the only way I can buy things is to get this identifier number, like an NI number, when I've gone through the system. I think this would remove a lot of the incentives. So putting an ID system in place doesn't automatically stop the migration issue, but it's a facet and it's a contributing factor.
Yeah, you would. I mean, there's no doubt. And a few people have pointed it out. Gary sent us a message a little earlier saying it would become a massive inconvenience if you currently live in the black economy. It would make that a lot more tricky.
Yeah, and that's what I think that we should be aiming towards, having not the ID card as a way of saying you must have an ID card or a digital ID. Yes, there are going to be privacy infringements. As everyone says, you do this in an ideal world, this is how it should work.
Sure.
But the fact is we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a very flawed world. So we need to work with what we've got. And I just think the positives from here, again, like with immigration, like with other things, and again with crime, if I want to become a drug dealer and have 3 burner phones, this stops me doing it because I've then got to get false IDs, fake numbers to buy phones that I can dispose of. There are all of these knock-on benefits where you could see the reduction of crime, and having lived in a country where we had a very, very low crime rate, I can say this does work. You have a system, they implemented it.
Does it work? Is there a low crime rate in Singapore because of ID, or is there a low crime rate there because if you're caught doing something, they'll, chop your charlies off if you do something terrible?
Yeah, there's multiple angles to that because they did still have the death penalty there. But it was that fear of actually I live in a organized society, I have to provide all of that. Yeah. They're very clean, they have no litter. So I think it just enforces these societal norms where you think I need to behave like that because everyone else does the same. And it has structure and it has rules. I'm not saying it's the be all and end all, but having lived in England and lived in there, you see the differences and going, is it causation or is it correlation? I'd say it's more causation, to be honest. OK.
Simon, it's a great call. Thank you. Appreciated. Simon in Northamptonshire. This in from Dan in Bristol. After the post office debacle, they can sod off about digital IDs. COVID demonstrated that we are a sneeze away from authoritarianism, so no thanks, says Dan. Katie says, I'm confused. I thought the use of digital systems for immigration identification was a given. I'm gobsmacked. We all have a digital ID, a digital footprint nationally and internationally. I can't believe it's taken this long for the penny to drop. It won't be the solution to the problem, I think, but it will certainly help. Digital ID as a deterrent? Well, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. The summer will be very telling, says Kate. We do already, don't we, have systems in place where, you think of everything from going through passport control, which I did a couple of times over the last week, both here and abroad. That's a whole digitalised system that clearly the minute they swipe the code on your passport and it goes under that little scanner, is able to tell them whether you're a wanted dodgepot who's about to be put in the cuffs and taken away to pokey, or whether you're just an ordinary citizen there to enjoy the views. So we've got that. We've got our banking on our phones. Our driving license will soon be there. But if you surrender everything into the digital world, then your relationship with the state, and there's no two ways around this, is irredeemably changed. And the problem is, the only change that could really happen would be to increase the information about you or your behaviour into that digital ID. And that is a genuine point of concern for anyone with a brain, frankly. Our lines are open. More coming up from you after the news at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Yeah, just gone to nearly 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. As you've been hearing, more than 40 Labour MPs have called for the introduction of digital ID so that the government can get a grip on things like illegal migration. It also will make things a hell of a lot easier to access public services. I mean, what ain't to like? Or apart from the total invasion of your privacy and a complete recalibration of your relationship with the state. Other than that, can you see the plus side, however? Is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? We'll take more comment from you on that. Also this afternoon, Health Secretary Wes Streeting has slammed one of Labour's biggest union backers, this is Unite, over the Birmingham bin strike, calling it a public health risk with rats and vermin crawling all over the place. There's 17,000 tonnes of muck and rubbish out there at the moment. And he branded the blocking of bin lorries totally unacceptable, and he is 100% correct. And the government plans to create a new watchdog to help close pay gaps for disabled people and ethnic minorities, saying current laws don't go fast enough, or far enough even. Our lines are open. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Lee in South Wales says the digital ID would not make any difference to illegal immigration. I wouldn't trust a word any Labour MP says after what's happened in the last 9 months, and anything that Tony Blair is pushing, I can tell you, would not be for the betterment of us. We would need a referendum on this, not a Labour government's choice. It is. I know there's loads of bits of our life that are already digitalised in so many ways, and you know, it's often the argument that's often thrown back at you when you simply flag a little bit of caution or hesitation over something like digital ID is that you're tracked anyway. And if you jump on a train, I made a journey on a train today, so before the journey on the train I stopped at the petrol station, then I went from the petrol station to a car park where I had to pay online for the parking in the car park. Then I walked to the train station, I paid for the ticket there, got to the other end, bought food, so I paid for the food. That entire journey would be, if I went missing tomorrow, within half an hour, the old bill would go, well, we know he filled his car up in Tesco, he parked up at this place, he bought a train ticket to London, and he stopped at M&S for some grub. That would all be very easy to ascertain. So it's there already. What's the problem? Seems to be the answer. Well, I think the problems come in the kind of area where we had some experience with COVID, didn't we? When there was, in fact, in some places, if you couldn't show your vaccine status, you were not allowed in. Now that took it to a whole different, show me your papers. That really did take it to a whole level. And by the way, I'm not purporting to know the answer. I mean, let's assume that COVID, as we now know, was not the bubonic plague, but let's assume it was. Then perhaps showing your health status is not a bad thing. Dan in Kent says, I've got no problem with ID. I'm a lorry driver, and by law we have to carry driving licence anyway. Good point. And Paul in Plymouth, I regret to inform you that you have exceeded your weekly carbon footprint. As a result of this breach in our citizens' ID standards, you have been issued with a fixed penalty notice for the next 7 days. Your available meat product options have been restricted, and a £50 green tax will be added to your online citizen account. If you wish to dispute this notice, please file a green justification record with your local Green Committee. Your reference number is 1984. Beautifully written, Paul. Thank you for that. I've warned about that exact potential, shall we say, that as things become digitalised and smart equipment, even your fridge and your cooker, your fridge will know whether it's got a turkey in there or a bag of carrots, because that's how it's going to work. So yeah, you start buying too much petrol, it'll say, hang on, you can't use that much petrol in a week. I'm sorry, your digital ID forbids you. You won't be able to pay for it. You won't be able to access the petrol pump, because naturally you'll have to swipe your ID card in order to use the petrol pump. You won't be able to do it. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. China says it's not going to back down, by the way. Was that the one, Adam? From Trump's escalating tariff war. It ain't backing down. They've continued to dig deep. If we get more on that, we will bring it to you here on the programme. And also, speaking of China, 2 Chinese soldiers captured during fighting in eastern Ukraine, have been captured during fighting in eastern Ukraine, according to Zelensky. The Chinese nationals were fighting in the east of the country. It's been announced by the president, calling it a significant development. The Chinese backing the Russians, as it were. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Oscar Redrop, former number 10 advisor, is back with us. Oscar, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. You see, that's the problem with digital ID, isn't it? It makes your brain go funny at the mere thought. At the mere thought of it, we discombobulate by the second. It's interesting. When you were in number 10, advising the main man, as it were. Did this one ever come up, the digital ID thing? Obviously, around COVID and all the rest of it, there was lots of talk about being able to prove some form of health credential.
Well, not to make it too personal, but I don't think Boris Johnson was a particular fan of Tony Blair. So I think of his branded suggestions probably didn't get too much airtime. And actually, when you think back to that period of time, and I know it's I mean, it's hugely contentious at the time, and actually the conversation still exists. People felt far too over-policed, and they felt their lives were controlled in a way that they weren't comfortable with even then. I mean, you think back to that hearing system and police walking around and telling people to pick up their ball because they can't sit in the park and play football or whatever it was, all those hundreds of examples. So I think, oddly enough, in some ways counterintuitively, that period of time, it was probably even more unpalatable.
What was that much of a conversation, that side of things? I mean, obviously, you're working in Number 10, the pressure is on, there's a pandemic snaking its way around the world. You know, we can look at it now and say, well, you know, clearly not quite as bad for some people, but horrendous for others, those that died with COVID, who wouldn't have died. You know, those numbers were significant, far worse than influenza. You know, people were dropping. And even those that did, I've got very fit and healthy mates who, in their kind of late 20s and 30s, who, you know, had a pretty rubbish time with COVID, really unpleasant experience. So, yes, it was real, but, you know, we look back now and go, OK, we could have managed it differently. But at the time, when it could have been the next bubonic plague, or that's what was considered, was there even room for a discussion about civil liberties?
I mean, I went in at quite an interesting time, which was when COVID was starting to phase out a little bit, and our lives were getting a bit more structured and a bit more normal. And I think at that time, the civil liberties argument began to get really heated, because I think in the white heat of it all, I think people accepted these emergency measures and, you know, completely, and we heard the phrase countless times, unprecedented event. But the cost of living crisis, which we almost rolls off the tongue far too easily these days, was that wave. You know, we think about, of course, a medical public health wave, but the economic wave was the one that was coming down the track. And you had businesses, local, small, medium, you know, huge retailers, the list goes on, who were absolutely on their knees. And there was an element of needing the public and wanting the public. And of course, the public also wanted to, in many ways, many parts of it did anyway, to get back to normal life, in terms of actually getting footfall again, getting the economy moving again. And we are still, and I know it's something that Rishi used on the campaign trail back in 2024, you know, global, you know, the Russia-Ukraine war, COVID, you know, and I know people don't like to hear it because it sounds like politicians making excuses, but the cost of COVID, I mean, we are still seeing day to day now. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, just to tie this back in with that story of digital ID, which advocates of this argue that it will save squillions of pounds in lots of areas because of its sort of hyper efficient way of working, particularly areas like the NHS. So it's got there's an economic benefit, an economic sense to it, it is argued. Do you buy that?
I think it's almost it's a policy that admits defeat in many ways. And hey, who knows? Maybe that's where we're at now. And what I mean by that is you are basically opening the borders, physically and metaphorically, and saying, well, you know, we can't stop people getting here illegally. Yeah. So once we're here, can we track them? Can we find them? And can that ease pressure on the NHS and other public services? And, you know, and I hate to be too political about it because I think people get quite sick of that sometimes, but you will see the right, the centre-right and, you know, inverted commas conservatives say that we need a deterrent. We need an enforceable deterrent to stop people getting here illegally in the first place. Everything after that kind of feels like an admittance defeat or window dressing. And then it also impacts people who probably feel, who just, you know, really regular tax-paying British citizens who feel really uncomfortable about ID cards and having their every movement and, you know, device tracked and et cetera, et cetera. So it's an admittance of defeat in my view.
Let's move on to this story. Nothing more delicious than seeing a socialist attack a socialist, and that's what we've got here with Wes Streeting. He's very, very unhappy with Unite, and he's giving it both barrels, saying that this is outrageous what is happening here, and the idea that they're blocking bin lorries. This is reference the Birmingham 17,000 tonnes of uncollected rubbish story. he's come out and attacked them, essentially. I mean, good for Wes Streeting in that respect, because I don't think anybody, wherever they sit politically, can say that any of this is okay.
Well, I think this is in some ways, and bear with me here, I think this is in some ways one of the most interesting stories that we've had over the last few months in this country. Stories, that makes it sound flippant, issues that we've had. Because it starts off relatively small, obviously it's local, but then as time goes on and the images and, you know, the vermin and the rats and the bins get higher and higher, it becomes symbolic. It becomes something bigger than itself. And for it to have got into this state is obviously an absolute disgrace. And again, not being too political, I remember when we had the sewage spills into the water supply, you know, people saw that almost as symbolic of where the Conservative government were at. And this is quite fast becoming that for the Labour Party, I think. And yes, you're right, Wes today was pretty strong on this, but you could still see, and I think it was a News UK interview actually, and I would look and urge people to watch him talk tough on it, because you could almost visibly see the awkwardness that it has for him, because he is of the left. Industrial action is something that he is kind of brought up on. That is bread and butter to him. Yeah. And you could see that tension in him on that. And honestly, I really think this story is going to grow and grow and grow if it isn't sorted out, because it is, as I said, it's becoming symbolic for people. It's becoming, is this the country I live in?
Yeah, and I hear it. Obviously, young bucks like us don't remember the 1970s, Oscar, but it's referenced a lot, isn't it? That, you know, rubbish piled high, people couldn't bury their dead. Anyone who's a student of politics, you know, will be aware of that era, regardless of whether we specifically remember it. And this has all the hallmarks of that again. This is almost, the, if you like, the totemic image that the socialists are back in charge.
Absolutely. And another thing that is like a double injustice and a double dagger to the heart of many people, I think, was that around this time, and yes, they're not technically directly related, but unfortunately, newsflash, that's not how politics always works, is that this was happening at the same time that MPs from that part of the country were campaigning for an airport to be built in Pakistan. And so it's just, you know, I mean, people are right to think, what the hell is going on here? Is this a joke? Yeah. And, you know, we see, you know, again, we talk about it quite a lot, but the reform surge that continues in the polls and what they tap into, which a lot of the political, and I'm using their language here, you know, political establishment, political elite, often forget, is the basics. And reform, as they build out their policy agenda, and you can just see the language they use. They just absolutely hone in on those basics, the basics of serving the British people.
It's that, isn't it? It's that kind of voice of common sense that many feel has simply been missing completely from British politics. Here's an interesting one. I think every political party has been accused of this one at some point. Keir Starmer apparently ignored calls to investigate the MP accused of bullying. This is the Labour MP, now suspended, Dan Norris. He was suspended for other reasons, which we can't discuss, but prior to that, he'd been accused of bullying and harassment. Former charity boss Andy Knott alleges that Norris forced him out of his role after disagreements over Labour's hunting ban stance, and it was there that this apparently happened while working alongside this charity. Labour were aware of it, Starmer was aware of it, did nothing. I mean, how many times have we seen that story repeated?
Yeah, this is when you campaign as a politician, just zooming out a little bit, and you know, and again, this isn't too political. I remember Rishi did it when he swooped in as leader of the Conservative Party, and Starmer campaigned on it heavily before the election. When you paint yourself as slightly holier than thou, and we're going to do politics differently, and, you know, cleaner than clean, you inevitably set yourself up for a fall, because it's not, as we see, it's human beings. It isn't party political. And I know each side like to grab onto the other side's mistakes when it comes to this kind of thing, and Labour did that to the Conservative Party relentlessly. And we saw with the freebie scandal when the Labour government first arrived, you know, just I mean, how tin-eared was that? I mean, calling out Conservatives for years and years and years, and then as soon as they go in, they're seen as, gift-taking, kind of, in inverted commas, almost like grifters.
100%, yeah. It took half an hour.
My advice to politicians on this stuff is you have to recognise, yes, you're a party politician, but you are ultimately a human being, and the people who you work with, particularly with Starmer, with such a huge majority, you're going to have human beings there that are not going to hold up the standards that you want to present as a leader. And so this kind of thing was unfortunately inevitably going to happen for Starmer. I have to say, though, and just lastly on this, there's a likability problem with Keir Starmer. And, in fairness to him, I don't think the British public saw him as a particularly warm, charismatic, and sturdy guy as it was, to be fair.
Yeah, I think that's becoming ever more evident, by the day. Oscar, thank you. As ever, Oscar Redrup, former number 10 advisor. He was the head honcho advising Boris Johnson back in the day before he walked the plank, of course. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. The digital ID question is looming over us. Anything else you've heard you want to chip in on? Absolutely fine by us at this end. Is digital ID the answer to the migrant crisis? Was one of the issues that's been floated around this idea that 40 Labour MPs are urging the government to embrace digital ID. Part of their argument is we'll be left behind. You've got big economies like India, the EU, that are embracing this and running with it. Then you could counter that and say, yeah, what, like China, you mean? And we know what digital ID means in China. And that is a natural, not just a natural, an intelligent reservation to have over the whole digital ID thing. Remember, if this is unleashed in its fullest possible form, you can't row back on it. So forever, your relationship with the state changes. There is nothing in terms of all that important stuff that they won't know about you. Now, you can argue, well, they could find all that out anyway. And there is a kind of big difference, though, between if you had to be investigated over something and therefore the powers that be or whatever authority or department needed to see more about you, they can get court orders to look into what you've been up to. Did you make a journey? They can check your passport, etc. They could get a court order to check your bank accounts. There's a system in place, and there's a system for a very good reason. It doesn't just happen like that some bloke at the Home Office can tap a few figures into a keyboard and up comes your profile, your algorithm of behaviour and interest. And that's not a conspiracy. That is the potential of embracing the entirety of digital ID in its fullest form. I don't think it is wrong to throw a big fat question mark over that until somebody can say, well, don't worry, because there's reassurances, because this and this would have to happen before somebody could see any of that info at the moment. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 20 past 2. This is Talk.
stabbed not just multiple times. One of them, I think, was stabbed 86 times, the other 92 times, and the third one a similar number. And the one that was stabbed 86 times, he only stopped stabbing her because he attempted to then remove her head. This was Axel Rudacabana, and the protests to which we're referring and where Lucy Connolly made her comments were in respect of those killings.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000, 25 past 2. One here from Frank. Afternoon, Ian. I'm dead set against digital ID. What will be on it? Who can access it? Will private information be sold to third parties? Or I wouldn't trust the authorities with my bus pass. Which is a fair point. Let's get over here and speak to Philippa in Poole. How are you doing, Philippa?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you, Ian. Lovely to speak to you.
And you too. What are you thinking?
Well, about the digital IDs, I think that it's pretty scary, actually, because it's a thin edge of the wedge. It could, you know, with the way technology is going, it could end up becoming like a chip that is put underneath our skin on our hands so that as we go through the supermarket, we literally just scan our hand and then we've paid for everything.
Yeah.
It could mean that...
A bit like one of those Amazon stores.
Exactly. And it could mean that all our health details on there, our banking details are on there, all our personal details, even the way we vote and what we think could be on there. And it's an infringement of our freedom. I think that it's just very dangerous. If you look at it from a religious point of view, it could be like Mark of the Beast 666. Have you seen the film In Time with Justin Timberlake, where they've got the time ticking down on their arm, and that's how they pay for things?
Wow.
It's all very linked into that.
Yeah.
It's very scary, and I'd say definitely no, because you just don't know where it's going to. And the way to stop the migration crisis, as I've said before on this station, is just get rid of all the incentives, get rid of the benefits, detain and deport. Very, very simple. And then you'll find that they won't end up keep coming over in the first place, because they'll have nothing to come over here for.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that, and in fairness, because we spoke to one of the Labour MPs, as you might have heard, to be fair, he wasn't saying this will solve the migration crisis, but there are some people saying it would help. But to be fair, I think there's other ways of solving the migration crisis, right? You haven't got to have digital ID to stop people breaking into your country.
Exactly. And like I said, I just think you just don't know with how technology is, how things can progress and change. And, you know, it's just another excuse to give us a cashless society, you know, where everything is recorded digitally, all our lives, every element of our lives, and I don't think that's a good thing at all.
It's a fair point, Philippa. Thank you very much indeed for that, Philippa in Dorset. Johanna in Salisbury says, I wouldn't mind minimum knowledge on ID cards, picture, address, national insurance number with NHS number, not full background. I don't want my whole life on a card to be stolen or hacked into. And if you look at, and again, I would challenge anyone who would suggest that this is conspiratorial. If you look at where we're at with something like net zero, for example, forget whether you agree with it or disagree with it, but if you consider the massive changes to our lives that this, for the good or the bad, massive changes to our lives that are involved with achieving Ed Miliband's dream of net zero, then it wouldn't surprise anyone to know that there will be penalties if you don't play the game. Now, extend that into your digital ID on your phone and you begin to see that actually, yeah, that penalty could work in all sorts of ways then. So they don't want you to have a certain boiler in your house at the moment. Your digital ID will doubtless because of smart meters, also give an inkling to the state of how much energy you're using. Oh, you've had your heating on too long this week. You've gone over the limit this week. I mean, that's not a great look, right? That you would be stupid to at least not ask that question. This one in from William. The digital ID could also stop any travel insurance scams, i.e. anyone coming here just for NHS services. So there's a potential positive. Simon says trust in any digital ID was completely destroyed when the UK government attempted to usher in vaccine passports. It's a no from me. Would the vaccine, the question I've often wondered about the vaccine passport thing, if the bubonic plague was here and something as literally as lethal as that, would our approach to vaccine passports, if that's the name we want to give them, be very different? Would it have felt that actually, yeah, I want to be able to go out, but I'm not going to go out with, we know Bob at number 83. He's got himself a dose of the plague. He's festering like a fool over there. He can't move for the mess he's in. We don't want him coming to the pub because he's going to give it to everybody. He's about as contagious as a rat. So no good. Would our view have been different to that? I think the problem with COVID is that most of us didn't have it or didn't have a manifestation of it even when we did have it. I tested positive for COVID without a single symptom. Had nothing going on at all. Absolutely nada. And it was extraordinary. It was very bizarre to be told you have something that is part of a pandemic. And I've even tried to think about that and go, well, I coughed a couple of times. Well, you cough every day, don't you, at some point? So was that connected to it, or did I not have it at all? I have no idea. But if something was more unequivocal, it was quite obvious, yes, you clearly had some horrendous disease that if it spread, it could kill someone instantly. I know COVID, there were those issues. Don't kill grandma and all the rest of it. And some of those were very real. I know people who did lose family members who would not have died, who would literally not have died. It's no good you say, well, they had an existing heart condition. I'm sorry, if somebody gets stabbed and then they die because they have a heart attack, you don't go, well, they did have an existing heart condition. So, no, they died because they were stabbed. That's the cause of death, in the same way that COVID, for some people, took lives that wouldn't have gone anyway. So it was very real for that group, but it just wasn't most of us, right? So you can see how there's hesitancy around how a government might deal with an ID or a digital ID system when it comes to things like that. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000, 25 to 3. We'll have more from you in a few moments. Also this, the government has announced plans to set up a new body to tackle unfair pay for ethnic minorities and people with disabilities as part of its efforts to improve equality laws. I'm actually pretty sure in saying that it's already illegal to pay somebody less because of their ethnicity. Or their disability, for that matter. There's maybe more to this. Equalities Minister Seema Malhotra wants to create a team that would work with trade unions to ensure everyone is paid fairly. The announcement comes as concerns grow that current rules aren't strong enough to protect against pay discrimination. Reem Ibrahim is, of course, Communication Manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, joins us now. Afternoon to you, Reem. Well, am I right, firstly, in saying that I think law of the land says you can't pay somebody different wage just because they have one arm?
Yes, exactly. You cannot pay two people that are doing the same work differently due to their immutable characteristics. And we actually already have some pretty tight regulations around pay disputes already, which basically mean that so many businesses have to foot the bill. So at the moment, if you are a business with more than 250 employees, you have to publish your gender pay gap. Now, I use quotation marks because, of course, it doesn't take into account any key differentials like the type of work that those people are doing or the experience that they do. Any employer knows there is so much that goes into deciding what one person's pay is. So the government already forced businesses across the country to publish a complete aggregate of men and women. Now, this results in some companies being demonised for discriminating against women. So, for example, EasyJet were accused of having a more than 50% pay gap, even though it didn't take into account pilots and cabin crew. And actually, when you just look at pilots and you just look at cabin crew, they were earning the same no matter what gender they were. Yeah. So we have to be very clear about this. There is so much that goes into somebody's pay, and looking at it as an aggregate doesn't work. Now, the government are now considering actually creating a body that will look at race and disability as well. This sort of comes from the Race and Disability Workplace Act, where they're discussing actually extending what I've just described that we already have for gender, the kind of compulsory pay gap reporting, and extending that to disability and to ethnicity. Now, the problem with this, if we're thinking about this from an incentives perspective, is if you're a business, you're a large business, and you don't want to have to go through what EasyJet went through, you're just not going to hire women, ethnic minorities, or disabled people in junior positions because it skews the average of your pay gap. So really, there are so many unintended consequences to this. It's costly for businesses, both reputationally and financially, and it just isn't true. Ultimately, it is already illegal for two people to be paid differently for the same work. Yeah. And the government trying to change that, trying to affect that, ultimately results in unintended consequences that hurt the very people they claim to protect.
I'm always bemused when I read one of those headlines every couple of weeks or couple of months. There's one out there. There's a huge gender pay gap between, at this engineering company or whatever. And when you read, when you read the headline, it makes you think that they are paying people different wages. And you then delve into it and you realise there's lots of different reasons for this, to the point that if you wrote that in your dissertation, you'd be kicked out of university for being an idiot if that's the way you were trying to, somehow calculate the story. Your lecturers would go, you can't calculate it like that. That makes no intelligent sense. But that's the way it is. And for some reason, it suits I don't know who to almost retell the story in this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the politics of naming and shaming. There have been so many other cases of this, and it ultimately is the fault of legislation that causes this. Do we remember the Asda pay dispute, the Next pay dispute? It was effectively the same story in which people that worked in workhouses and sort of the ground stuff, they were carrying pretty heavy stuff, happened to be majority men, which probably makes sense. Men are stronger than women, and I'm a woman. I don't think I would find a job like that particularly attractive. And there were more women that worked in the retail staff, so sort of as shopkeepers, on the ground staff, at the tills, etc. And the courts decided that those two jobs were of equal value, and so it was discrimination to pay them differently. But those companies were struggling to hire people in their warehouses, which is why they increased the salary offering. That's the market working. That's demand is decreased, or demand is increased, so they increase the salary. That's the market working. And instead, you have governments that are deciding what work is of equal value. This has nothing to do with discrimination whatsoever.
No.
This is not discrimination.
And how is a court allowed to decide this? I mean, that's extraordinary. These are two different jobs. And in the same way that if you and I were working for a company and you took maternity leave because you wanted to start a family and therefore were on a reduced rate for a certain period of time, the conclusion at the end of that period, before you came back full time, would be that they have a gender pay gap. It wouldn't explain the story. It's like, well, you weren't there for half of it. That's partly why. No one had, you know, the Emporium hadn't discriminated against you. You were just taking time off for that reason.
Exactly, and that's a wonderful thing to do, and I hope one day to be a mother, and I think it's really wonderful that we should encourage women to do that. We've got a declining birth rate, so we definitely need to have more kids. True. That being said, it's not fair to say if you've got person A who stays in the workforce their entire life and person B who takes out 5 years, that person A and person B should be paid the same necessarily. I mean, if you have less experience, and experience as part of what contributes to your salary, it makes sense for an employer to say, you know what, that person might be paid less. So Claudia Goldin, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics a couple of years ago, came to this conclusion. She looked at the history of gender pay gap disparities and said that the majority of it, of course, discrimination does occur in some cases, and that's where you can go and get your legal team to sort it out. But in the majority of cases, the gender pay gap is actually the motherhood gap. It's the difference between women who take time out of work to have children and women that decide to stay in work. And actually, when you look at purely women, younger women, so women my age, and that don't have children, and men, often there is absolutely no pay gap. And sometimes, in many cases, in industries such as in finance or in the city, often women are paid more. So
yes, there's some really interesting data about that as well, which doesn't get talked about with quite the same volume.
Exactly. And when you look at all of the data, and you don't see men complaining about that, because ultimately it's about what companies deem valuable in those situations. And it's completely unfair, I think, to tell women across the country that they are going to never be able to compete on the same level playing field as men, that they're always going to be discriminated against. It's the politics of victimhood, telling women that they're victims. And now the government are considering creating this new quango, brilliant, as if we need any more, on race and disability, which is just going to have the same effect. What the government are doing are telling women, ethnic minorities and disabled people that you can never compete on the same level as your white male counterparts. And I think that is discrimination.
100%. And then there's another area that I see it in my industry quite a bit, Reem, which is, how do you value experience over somebody? Because often there's a different rate. Do you remember Jeremy Vine was caught in this story a couple of years ago on a little slot he did on BBC News that was taken over by a very capable journalist doing a great job, but one that had none of the profile of Vine and possibly, I don't know about viewing numbers, whether that changed significantly or not, but you know, he was paid X because it was part of his wider package, and she got given the job after he left and wasn't paid as much. And, you know, all hell broke loose. Why isn't this woman being paid the same? It's like, well, whether you like Jeremy or not, and I know him a bit. He's a fine guy.
I love Jeremy. He's brilliant.
Yeah, you know Jeremy. You know, apart from his bicycle peccadillos, he's great. He should have been paid more. He should absolutely have been paid more for that job. And I made this argument, and somebody... It happens a lot when you do double-header radio shows as well, where there's, you know, two of you and one has, you know, the woman is more experienced than the bloke. And I said to somebody recently, if Channel 4 came along in the unlikely event, Reem, and said, right, we want me to be a co-host of a new programme about horse racing, for example, and Claire Balding is going to be the main host and I'm going to be the kind of co-host, frankly, pay Balding more money than me because she knows loads about horses. And I know jack about horses, but I can be the bloke that, you know, slightly cheeky chappy that chips in, and I can read an auto cue, and when somebody shouts in my ear at 1,000 miles an hour, I can carry on talking as if that's not how... I can do all of that, but she's the expert. Pay her the money, pay me a bit less than her. I'd be all right with that.
Absolutely. So, Ian, what you've just described here is the fact that there are so many different factors to take into account when considering somebody's pay, and you cannot possibly just look at somebody's race or their gender or their disabilities and decide that that pay is worth a certain amount. Ultimately, it's the market that decides. It's employers and employees, is their value. We saw with the Next and the Asda cases, which were absolutely abhorrent. The companies did nothing wrong. They actually did everything right. They said, you know what, people don't want to work in the warehouse, so we're going to increase the pay offering and hopefully more people will work there. And it worked. And then you've got unions that then decide they're going to create an equal pay dispute. That's not discrimination. This is not discrimination. This is the market working and adults being allowed to be paid exactly what they're worth, depending on supply and demand. That's how the labour market works. What I find interesting is the government and also unions seem to always think that the solution to these problems are more bureaucracy, more quangos. I mean, just as the government are saying they're going to cut public spending, they're going to reduce bureaucracy, they're going to cut the quangos. Now we're hearing about creating a new quango for race and disability. And it's absolutely unfair that they're going to be treating these companies, demonising them in so many ways, despite the fact that their pay is being decided by so many other factors. We have to be very clear. You cannot make like-for-like comparisons unless you take two people with exactly the same experience, exactly the same output, whatever that output is judged to be, and exactly the same qualifications, which is just impossible because we're all unique individuals.
But now we're seeing more trans men who can get pregnant. Maybe that we're going to see this... this whole thing balanced out after all through the most curious of methods. Who knows?
Perhaps we might see that. It's interesting if there was the case very recently of the trans woman that won that sports race. I can't remember which competition it was, and lots of discussions about whether or not trans women should even be allowed to compete in general. But again, that's effectively biological men being able to compete with biological women in areas in which they're just not the same. I mean, there are obviously biological differences between men and women, and that's why I think when it comes to things like pay, we have to be very clear about this. Discrimination is not always what is occurring when you see a pay disparity between men and women, or between an able-bodied person or a disabled person, or between a white person and an ethnic minority. Discrimination is not the first thing we should be pointing to when 100%. We see pay disparities.
And interesting, since we've been talking, I've just had a text from a friend of mine who's one of the commissioning editors at Channel 4 who's interested in that Claire Balding racing show. So, you know, it's interesting what comes up.
I'll be watching.
Indeed. Well, you might be part of it at this rate. Let's see. Listen, Reem, great to have you on with us as ever. Reem Ibrahim, who is, of course, Communications Manager at the IEA. Thank you to her. Over to you on this one as well. 0344 499 1000.
sheer number of petty criminals, thieves, mobile phone thefts, all that sort of thing, the sheer number of people who commit crimes almost every day and simply don't get sentences of this long. Real bread and butter stuff, the stuff that you learn when you're in primary school or when you're a toddler. You don't take things that don't belong to you, you don't break things that don't belong to you, you don't attack people for no good reason, often not even for a good reason. Those people are the ones that are not going to prison at all. But as you say, somebody who sent a tweet, well, an example must be made of that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 10 to 3 as we speak. The Prime Minister is at the Liaison Committee. This is the kind of round about twice a year the Prime Minister attends a committee hearing that is chaired by all of the chairs of the various committees, or most of the important ones. They can throw a whole bunch of questions at Keir Starmer. He's there at the moment. They usually last a good few hours. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown is currently the Conservative throwing questions. They're talking about tariffs and a whole variety of other issues. So it's kind of a big moment. What comes of this? I don't know, there's various elements to it. Everybody hopes for a big headline or an announcement of some kind, but Prime Ministers are pretty guarded when it comes to these things. But it's a very general sense, rather than a Home Affairs Select Committee or a Treasury one. The PM could have all manner of questions thrown at him, and he doesn't know what all of those questions are going to be. So anything that comes from that, we'll bring it to you here first on Talk. Just before we continue, the voice of doom. This is day 8. Day 8. This is the mystery voice with the political angle to it. Here's the question. Whose voice is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? We haven't had a winner for, well, this is day 8. A long, long time on this one. It's gone on for a bit. If you know who this is.
Political decisions were taken.
Do not call, because there is no prize. Come on, Amy. But you can, of course, message us 87222 if you fancy having a crack at it. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you who it is on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow for day 9. Here's the voice again.
Political decisions were taken.
87222 if you know. Back to your calls. Tim is in Suffolk on digital IDs. What do you think, Tim? Good afternoon.
I think it's great, mate. We've been doing it in the construction industry for over 5 years.
Digital ID. In what sort of way is it used in construction?
Bio ID. So it'd either be fingerprint or facial recognition.
And this is for what purpose?
To get in.
So if I want to be a hod carrier?
Yeah. If you come to my big job in South London,
yeah,
you will then need to fill in a form.
Mm-hmm.
So name, rank, number,
yep,
national insurance number, etc., etc. Those were automatically linked back to a central database to check to make sure there was no duplicates. Nothing more than that. Once you're on the system, though, that was it. If you went to another job, you just got your briefing, they ticked the box, and off you went.
Got it. So
and that's been there for 5 years or more.
And that sounds like an obvious implication of using a bit of technology to speed up processes.
And then where it could go for our immigrants of whatever flavour.
Yeah.
If you can't provide a UK birth certificate, which obviously has a registration number on it as well,
mm-hmm,
you have to fill the bio ID form in.
Okay.
If they, for the illegals, if they link that to the IMEI number of the mobile phones, they could track all the illegals across the whole country.
That's true, but what about the moody constructor who's building a couple of houses that just hires some illegal people to assist with cheap labour?
You probably don't want that answer.
But it happens, doesn't it? We know it happens.
It does, and unfortunately Mr Smith and his 10 whatevers is always going to bypass the system, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you've got... the police have got to do what they're paid to do, isn't it? Which is police the country.
Yeah, no, I get that. So the principle... I mean, what you've given is a great example of how the principle of something just cuts out bureaucracy, it's safer. To have it on a national level, though, where there's a whole lot more information on it, does that bother you?
It's already there. That lady that phoned in a minute ago described her phone.
Yeah, it's there in different parts, but it's not there in one place, and it's not accessible in one place.
It's on her phone. Anybody can hack her phone.
Well, that's true, but it depends what she's put on her phone, doesn't it?
Well, so my phone I'm talking to on that has got my hospital ID, my bank, and other things as well, which all have my name.
That's true, but that was you volunteered that information, right?
Correct, but that's only because I could get access to my hospital records.
Yeah.
With regards to the people who employ the dodgy characters, make it painful. Hit them where it hurts the most.
Yep.
In the pocket.
Got it. Tim, thank you very much indeed for that interesting angle on digital ID. It's already happening in the construction industry, although, I think we all know that there are clearly builders out there that would, stop off in a lay-by somewhere on a busy motorway, pick up a bunch of characters and get them to start roofing by 11 a.m. And probably work for the next 24 hours. Andrew in Hertfordshire on the same issue. Digital ID, Andrew, what do you think?
You've got a national insurance number.
Yep.
That's the key to the whole thing. And if you go on there and you try and find out what your pension's going to be, it'll tell you whether you'll get paid out or not. So the actual national insurance number is linked to the amount of time that you've paid into it. And that's the database that you want to work with, because you want to make all the people that are good and have paid in accessible, and then you identify the others, and that's what you have to do. But Ian, all of this is just worthless. It's white noise. Another 400, 500, 600 have arrived today. We're focusing on the wrong thing all the time. We just need to tell the French no fishing because it's dangerous to the immigrant boats, pay the French fishermen whatever they lose, and then any woman that turns up or parent with a child, the child goes into care, somewhere like Rotherham would be good, and they are put on the register for people that can never be left alone with children. Because if Katie Price or that woman Hopkins, if they put a child on a boat and took it across the channel, the papers would destroy them. We are rewarding the wrong type of person for the wrong type of behaviour.
Do you think when it comes to digital ID in the wider issue, Andrew, that ultimately 10, 15 years down the line, we'd solve all of these problems?
Yeah, but one of your earlier callers said that. But think about the Tesco Club card. Everybody wants that. That's digital IT. The National Health have sold all of our records, or given them rather, to Google to trawl. So when people see the upside, they're on board. So if you said, if you have this card, your income tax is reduced by 2%, everybody do it that's paying. And then it would identify the people that aren't paying.
Yeah, so, I mean, what's not to like, other than the fact that you've been sort of almost bribed into handing over everything about your life to the government?
But they've got that. I would far rather give that up to make your family safe.
Isn't that the mistake, though?
You're good as devil's advocate.
Well, Benjamin Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety.
Yeah, but...
I'm not saying he was Plato, by the way, but it's a well-known quote.
Look at some of these parents that are going to the funeral of their children because of the type of people we're letting into the country. We're letting them down by not doing this.
That's a powerful point to finish on. Listen, Andrew, thank you for that. Great call from Andrew. There's pros and cons is the headline from that, and Andrew senses more pros. Kenny in Edinburgh says, it annoys the hell out of me that at Wimbledon, the women's championship, women's champions get the same as men's pay despite only playing 3 set matches. Compared to the men's, which is 5. A person working 8 hours should never take home the same money as somebody working 12 hours, regardless of sex, ethnicity, or their physical capabilities. Yeah, that one got settled like almost with no debate, didn't it, after a while? No one talks about that anymore. Good point from Kenny, thank you. Will we get a correct answer to the voice of doom? We'll find out on the other side of the news. Remember, this is the voice you are trying to identify.
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? Don't call. because we don't have any prizes at this end. But you can message if you want to take part. It's up to you. 87222 is where you will find us. We'll take more calls on the big question as well. Is digital ID the answer, particularly to the migrant crisis and elsewhere? Our lines are open. This is Talk. Let's get the news headlines at 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Lots to come in this section, including the trigger discussion we've been having since more than 40 Labour MPs have called for the introduction of digital ID so the government can get a grip on illegal immigration and also make it easier for people to access services. Tony Blair has banged on about this for many, many years. The current Labour government have no plans to introduce it, but 40 Labour MPs think they should. Would digital ID be the answer to the migrant crisis? Thoughts on that? Also this afternoon, the European Court of Human Rights has rejected a claim by businessman Sir Philip Green that naming him in Parliament violated his right to privacy. It's a curious one. We're going to chat to our friend Alan Miller in just a second on that. And 3 councils in England didn't fix a single pothole or resurface any roads at all for the entirety of last year. Campaigners are calling for SUV drivers to be taxed more to help fund repairs. But what about electric cars? Aren't they twice the weight of even your average family SUV? Details on that as well. 0344 499 1000. Another one on the tennis question. Matt says, in Wimbledon, women get the same amount of money as men. Is that fair? You could say yes, but you could say no, because women play 3 sets and men play 5. Men get paid less per set. I think the answer to that, and Adam will probably back me up, is that the kind of proportionate effort required is the same. Isn't that broadly what is said, I think? So a woman playing 3 sets is kind of the same as a man playing 5 sets in terms of your kind of physical... the point where you begin to absolutely flank and be knackered is kind of the same for women as it is for men as a proportion of the sets they're playing. Something like that. Or you could say that's cobblers, and women just get paid more. I don't know. It depends on... I know Serena Williams was very animated about that when she was asked. John McEnroe had a totally unbroadcastable, I think, response to it, but we'll leave it there. Thank you, Matt, for that. Voice of Doom. OK, have we got, finally, on day 8 of the Mystery Voice, have we got a winner? This is the voice we're trying to identify.
Political decisions were taken.
Who the heck is that? These are some of the answers that we have had. Angela Rayner. It is not. In fact, it's definitely not Angela Rayner. Ian Hislop, no. David Cameron, no. It's because there's something Cameron-y about it. Comes up every day, David Cameron. Duncan Norvell, no. John McTiernan, it is not. Ian Duncan Smith, no. Tim Davey, no. John Knott, no. In fact, we haven't got an answer. Man alive. We've had I think, far trickier ones than this, and they've gone in instantly in the first day. We never get let down. This one is eluding the good and the great of our listener base here. It means it returns tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
Political decisions were taken.
If you think you know who that is, tomorrow about 2:45, the voice of doom is back. Now, 3:05, the European Court on Human Rights has rejected Sir Philip Green's attempt to stop MPs and Lords from naming people protected by court orders. The billionaire had tried to keep his name secret after being accused of sexual misconduct back in 2018, but he was identified in Parliament despite having a gagging order in place. Of course, politicians get parliamentary privilege so they can name people without being in any way prosecuted. Judges ruled his privacy wasn't breached and dismissed his other complaints about fairness and legal remedies. Let's speak with Alan Miller, founder of the Together Declaration. Afternoon to you, Alan. It's an interesting one, this, because no one's going to defend, someone who's done something bad and, rather ugly and nasty. But there's putting the specifics and the sort of seductive nature of, some of the cases. The fact that a member of Parliament or a member of the, member of the House of Commons or a member of the House of Lords has the right to name someone is still rather interesting in the 21st century.
I think parliamentary privilege is really important, Ian, and if they're public figures, these things need to be open for scrutiny and assessment and evaluation. The powerful often seek to gag things because they're able to do it. But the thing about parliamentary privilege is that if it's in the public interest, particularly, representatives, either members of Parliament or indeed in the Lords, you could have a view about whether the Lords should be there or not, but at the moment it is, and there should be an ability for people to do this, and certainly not to have judges telling elected representatives. We've got a big problem with this, particularly with lawfare generally, but judges telling elected representatives in a democratic country that they should not be able to discuss things. And so what we've seen this case, which is important because now the ECHR has ruled that, that's not going to be upheld. However, it shouldn't be down to the discretion of judges, particularly not foreign judges. And we should leave the ECHR. It shouldn't have any bearing on our sovereign rules and decisions. But even judges in Britain, Ian, and we've seen this situation occur, haven't we? We've seen it during Southport. We saw MPs gagged, not allowed. They said it could discriminate against it could prejudice the court case. And yet, we were basically lied to, weren't we? That whole period in the run-up to it, there was an attempt to say, well, we're not too sure. If you raise the question, could it be radical, jihadi? You're being racist, you're being insightful. People have gone to prison for these things. And yet, we know that our Prime Minister and the Home Office and, Yvette Cooper knew about these things. They must have known about the PDF from Al-Qaeda. They must have known about the ricin at the time it was appropriated. And yet, because there's so much contempt for the public, it was withheld. They think because people would just go crazy. But actually, the public is furious that we're not able to, we're being treated with contempt. And you see, this is part of the issue. The fact that in a free society, we need to have elected representatives debate things and discuss them. And it might be very awkward and unpleasant for wealthy or famous people. And I get from a personal point of view, they won't like it. We've seen that with Grant. We've seen people try and shutter things because they don't like it. But we've also seen in lockdowns, Ian, just on this point, we saw that there was a proroguing of Parliament. There was a lack of scrutiny and debate and discussion. There was a stifling of those things. We need less of that. We need open debate and discussion, however awkward and painful it might be.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I understand that sometimes it can be a little mischievous when an MP, wants they want a bit of limelight. Who's going to be? We saw it with a famous footballer, didn't we, a little while back, where, is somebody going to? Everyone on social media had already named that person, but nobody had done so officially, and everyone thought, there's going to be an MP that's going to do it, and it shouldn't be used in that way, almost for clickbait, I suppose. I guess there's a problem there, but simultaneously, you're right. Just because someone's a billionaire and they were able to get a gagging order about something, that in itself is a problem, right? That's not good in a society that you can do that because you've got a few quid. So thank goodness an MP is able to say something.
Absolutely. I mean, our libel laws, wealthy people come from around the world to utilise them. And they're not in the spirit of free speech either. You're guilty until basically the onus is to prove your innocence. You're assumed to be guilty under the libel laws, as opposed to how our actual laws under English law are more generally, that there's a presumption of innocence and they have to prove your guilt. So they're very, very difficult to argue against, and wealthy people love them. And I just think that the litmus test is always that notion. The antiseptic is the light. Shine it on it. Let us make decisions. Of course, there are moments where if it's critical to, the security of the nation state, if they're, but even those things get manipulated and used and weaponized, right? People will say, and so I think that on balance, it's good that it didn't happen, but we've got to kick back against this idea that judges can be making decisions over our elected representatives. And we need much more debate and discussion. When they went in and that whole issue around Southport was there, and you could see that everyone had been told, they'd been warned, the MPs had been warned, you're not allowed to discuss this. And that we associate with those sorts of things other countries, right? We don't think that's the British way. And more we're seeing this stifling of free speech. We're seeing limits and shutdowns. We've seen that impact on the rights to protest as well, when they could have used the laws that already existed there. So we've got weak authoritarians. And the Together Declaration, we're arguing consistently for free speech and the principle around the rights to association and against this. We know that many are imprisoned, over 70 over the summer, from the summer onwards, and many more over posts, Ian, when they've let hardened criminals out. It's really very wrong. Yeah, well, on that point, we discussed the Lucy Connolly story yesterday on the programme. There's a bit of a petition for her to be released. No one is supporting what she tweeted. We all know that because we're not stupid. But it was quickly deleted. I think the question here is getting nearly 3 years in jail for it is extraordinary. Today, Elon Musk has criticised UK prison authorities for denying Lucy Connolly temporary leave to support her husband, who's not very well, and her struggling daughter as well. So, I mean, this story, I don't know whether this goes in her favour or goes against her, because you only want some Mardy judge who is, who's Elon Musk to tell us what to do. So we're going to clamp down and sort of double down on our decision. But it is interesting how this particular story, feeding into what you were just saying, Alan, is really, galvanising and mobilising quite a lot of opinion. I think it's really important that Elon Musk has said, has criticised this situation about Lucy Connolly and said, and JD Vance is right when he warned everyone about Europe and free speech and the impact. And, the president himself has said, free speech will be an indicator of trade. And it's all very well that judges might say, who is that person not from Britain? Right, Elon Musk is not from Britain, that's true. He does actually have a company that's very important within Britain, which we know is X, and it's in the public square. But who is a judge to tell us whether we should be able to have freedom of speech or not? Who is a judge to say actually, that, you know, let's and this is a political conversation, right? So there's a whole question of incitement, and that needs to be addressed in its own terms. But what we've got is a situation where she wrote something that was very, very unpleasant, deeply unpleasant. But the question is, if you look at the people who firstly are being given license to go and visit, they've done all sorts of things that have actually physically harmed people themselves, right? Not written things about things. And the other thing is, on what basis are people being able to attack people, do all sorts of burglaries and crime, violence at multiple levels, and not getting anything like these sentences? And we've seen them. And paedophiles and sexual and a range of different people have been released or not imprisoned. And here we have a mother and a carer. She's a carer as well as being a mother, who's very concerned about her children. Obviously, partly that informed some of her comments. You know, people rightly were shocked by her comments. But the question, Ian, is, should people be imprisoned for posts on social media? And I think the thing is, and, you know, if you're directly offering someone something to go and do something, then that's one thing. But the thing is, you know, they've made the point in the States, these are like memes in many ways, right? And she deleted it very quickly. The big question is, we've got a huge issue in Britain when it comes to free speech. We've got a two-tier approach. We've seen at the same time that there's questions around Keir Starmer, not just about what's happened around Southport, but also about things like Dan Morris. Did he get a report on him? Did he not? Are there different measures that are going out for some people rather than others? Why is there an obsession about a discussion around Islamophobia? And yet at the same time, there's a different approach towards some people, often white, working class British people, and or people that just don't happen to agree with the metropolitan elite. The British public is sick of it. I think in our elections in May, Ian, we're going to see that demonstrated. But more broadly, it's very dangerous when you weaponise the judiciary and the police on a two-tier basis and say some people are treated differently. And we've seen that with the attempt for the Sentencing Council to say that as well. Fortunately, it was kicked out. But the very idea that some people should be treated differently on their ethnicity or on their sex is part of the problem with the whole DEI thing. That's why together, we're called together. We believe that everyone in a nation state, sovereign citizens together, but we need to have shared values. We need to believe in the ideas, the virtues of the nation and principles that we all go along with. And it's essential that we do that. And we're able to thrash out our ideas with people we disagree with. And this is the real point. People can say all sorts of things that are reprehensible, and it's only when that can be defended that we have free speech. Because, of course, people are going to agree with things they agree with. Yeah. It's Voltaire's spirit that I will die for your right to offend me. That's the premise we need to have. We're grown up. We can handle it. Society can deal with that. What we can't deal with is constantly being shuttered and suffocated and having the elite have a two-tier police and justice system. That needs to end, and we invite everyone to get involved with us together. And I thank Elon,
Alan,
and for his contribution to free speech.
Is there ever a case, though, where you might write something on social media that is worthy of being taken to court for and possibly imprisoned?
Yeah, I think there are examples that you could get. We could give many examples there. If you say, could you show up at this point? And I'm going to be careful what I say now, because
kill somebody or whatever.
If you go and do this, I'm agreeing to give you some money.
There's a fella at number 63 I don't like very much, and there's £5,000 to anyone who wants to. Yeah,
that's right. Not what we've seen, and we're seeing some remarkably concerning things. We've seen people being having 6 police officers turn up and couples going into a cell for 6 to 8 hours because they're criticising teachers at a school on WhatsApp groups. We've seen that happen with a grandma being visited by police because she said something about counsellors that were really, really rude about the public in WhatsApp. It's absolutely unacceptable. This used to be tin pot dictators where these things happened, and we look on and think, oh, thank goodness that we live in this kind of country. That's why together we are really seriously working with all sorts of groups and people, but encouraging the public to make sure, have your voices heard. Tell councillors and MPs, as the elections are upcoming, they're listening. We need to make sure everyone hears that free speech is the bedrock of Britain. The Enlightenment, the Scottish and English, the British Enlightenment that went round the world, giving people the ability, the idea that we could have freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, that inspired many things, not least partially the American Revolution as well. And the Constitution, those things are so paramount, and they don't do them everywhere, Ian. As we know, in many places, vast swathes of land, they do not have that premise of free speech. It's something we need to live and fight for. We are the beneficiaries. We stand on the shoulders of many of our relatives who did fight tooth and nail for it, and many still continue to do bravely. Many have sacrificed a great deal. We have a duty to uphold it and not let it get suffocated by these weak authoritarians.
Brilliant. Listen, Alan, it's great. What a thorough response from you as well, as ever. Thank you. He is Alan Miller, founder of the Together Declaration. And people will argue forever, won't they, as to what constitutes something that is worthy of the authorities coming around to somebody's house, arresting somebody, taking them to court. What Lucy Connolly wrote was pretty despicable stuff. It was quite low. Was she seriously invoking a riot? She wasn't, by the way, charged with that. But was that... would anybody have seen that and suggested that she was? And I guess that's the balance, isn't it? Because some would have said, well, that looks to me like someone who's encouraging people to go round to a hotel and set fire to the damn thing. That's a clear-cut case where you would use the law. But even if you did take her to court and found her guilty, and you might, I'm not absolutely sure whether 3 years in jail or 31 months in jail is necessarily the correct or proportionate response, and particularly when we have, and look, I know this is a bit of a cliche, you know, the sort of two-tier system. I've done this job for a long, long time. There's never been a point in that time when we couldn't say, how come a bloke in Middlesbrough got this for this and a fella in Cornwall did the same thing and he got nothing? He didn't go to jail, but Middlesbrough boy, he's got 3 years. The north-south divide, it's a two-tier jail. There's always been why did the paedophile get a suspended sentence and the bloke that's got several parking offences and didn't pay the bailiffs went to jail for 3 months. There's lots of examples of that. They will always be there. Don't ask me to explain it. I can't. It's not always the same judge, different judges, different circumstances, different times, etc. I know this happened against the backdrop of rioting and trouble, and the judiciary always come down hard with that backdrop around. There's precedent for that, 2011 and the London riots there. But whatever way you slice it, 31 months in jail does seem, I think we'd all agree, excessive. If nothing else, it's excessive. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
All the time are accused of one thing more than anything else, and that's breaking their promises. This is something which you can't level at Donald Trump, especially regarding tariffs, because not just in this election, but as old as the hills, Donald Trump has been going on about how America needs tariffs to protect American jobs American livelihoods and their manufacturing sector. So this is something he's been saying for a long time, and people who are now acting surprised that he's actually followed through with it, I think need a bit of a reality check.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. It's interesting that the women's tennis conversation has really garnered a lot of response on the the 5-set versus 3-set, and to some people it was settled years ago, and to others not so sure. Kenny says the women players at Wimbledon, led by Serena Williams, actually offered to play 5-setters but were told they didn't need to, and very quickly accepted this. They should have been made to play the same length of match. If they want equality, then fine. But it's true equality, everything the same for everyone, every time, no excuses or crying about being tired or discriminated against. This blatantly unfair situation needs to be looked at again. You have equality or you don't, and you can't just ignore the parts that don't suit you. Now, I suppose, again, the argument that comes up is that, reaching your peak of, I don't know, tiredness, to put it in a very crude sense, you are still playing to your, as a proportion to the same level, bearing in mind your physical differences. So like having kind of different weights, I suppose, in boxing, something of that nature. But there's more nuanced elements to this as well. You could also say, what about women's football? Because they still play 90 minutes. Women's rugby still plays 80 minutes. There's no difference in that respect. In tennis, the argument is they train for the same length of time. They train for, the same period in the run-up to a Grand Slam, for example, or any other tournament for that matter. They play that. Then you can get into the other argument that what about sponsorship and, who's more popular to watch? It's becoming a narrower thing with tennis, but it's still by far more people on balance will watch a male final than a women's final. So there's loads to it, and I kind of get it, and I also don't get it, if that makes sense. Let's talk digital ID. Chris is in Epsom. Chris, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
I like watching women's tennis.
You do?
Yeah.
There you go.
I think the rallies are generally better. Anyway, that's besides the point. Digital ID.
Yes.
This is your Labour politician shot himself in the foot. He went, no, it gives the people more power over their data, and it's not the government. It gives the people the power. And then his last sentence, if you didn't catch it, was the control measures.
The control measures.
Yeah, it's all about control.
Yeah.
I mean, the EU, we've talked about this before, the EU are issuing digital ID cards with biometrics, and they're considering now they're going to add a carbon credit to that card as well.
Who has said that? I've seen that written on social media. Is it true? And I'm asking that genuinely, Chris.
Yeah, Ursula von der Leyen, right? That lovely. She's the president of the commission.
She's the president, yeah.
And she's also under investigation for a €500 million fraud and allowed to continue on. But there you go.
She denies that.
Yeah, don't know always. They're going to slide a carbon credit onto it. When that happens, the government's going to have full control over everything that you do. The UK government have bought the next 7 years of Nectar points and Tesco Club Card points.
They've bought the next... Really?
Yeah, they've done a deal with Nectar and Tesco's because they want to stamp out the black economy. But the thing, it's going to do nothing to control the illegal immigration, because even if you get them without an ID card, they're going to appeal it.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, well, we lived here for 6 months illegally, and we've got a family here now, so they're going to be allowed to stay. Unless as Sackart, the historian, who's very up on all this, the ECHR is not the problem on its own. We also have our human rights laws all of them, all of this, and the Sentencing Council, and everything else that we've been moaning about, goes back to Blair in 2008. And if we don't have a revision and repeal everything that he did, then we're going to be stuck with these laws because they're too entangled. And as Sakar said, not Sakar, what's his name? Starkey. As Starkey has gone into it, wrote a big article about it.
Yeah.
Unless you unpick all of these, and you have to go back to 2008 to unpick all of them, we're still going to be saddled with the same laws, and we're never going to move forward. It's never going to do the things that they're going to tell us it will do, but it will give them full control over us. This is not good. This is not good in any sense.
Well, that would be, I suppose, a critic of what you're saying, Chris, would say you're giving, and reasonably, by the way, you're giving the worst case scenario.
Well, tell me when the government's ever given us the best case scenario. When they're doing something for our benefit and we're going to be in control. When has that ever happened?
When has it ever happened, indeed? Chris, I've got to move for no other reason than time because I'm going to talk potholes in a minute. That's Chris in Epsom. Is that right? The government have bought the Nectar card data. Really? Nectar card people aren't here to defend or respond to that, I should add. So hold that thought. Don't spread it around because there might be more to that. Carbon credits, the carbon thing, you can... As night follows day, you can kind of see that being a thing. And the evidence for that is completely measured. You've just got to look at how net zero is being implemented, what it means for so many areas of the economy. Companies that have been massively hit, scuppered or closed down because they can't function any longer. I'm not suggesting that, you know, in 100 years' time they say, well, there's a good reason for that because we saved the planet. Well, hey, did we? I mean, that's the evidence, that's the bit of missing evidence that I think many people are requiring. Looking at how evangelical they have been on net zero, it's not unreasonable to say, well, if there was a system, a digital ID system that could include your carbon credits, can you imagine governments implementing that? Well, given that they are going to be cutting down God knows how many forests to stick solar farms and windmill farms and Lord knows what all over the place. And that's just the two obvious initiatives. The way that houses are built, the way they're constructed, if you want to be a landlord, what it's got to look like, the boiler, the size of your windows, what goes under the floor, etc. Given all of that, I think you would, if you were going into a court of law and somebody said, give us your evidence as to why you think a government might introduce something like carbon credits on an ID system, you would say, yeah, I can do that very easily, because there is quite a lot of evidence to show the enthusiasm with which the government are implementing this stuff. And I think that would be a fairly reasonable riposte to the doubters. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a reasonable reply. 0344 499 1000. Steve and Alan, the comedian, joins us in a moment. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk, 25 to 4. Jeremy Carl's here, of course, with Drive at 4. Now, 3 councils, including Labour-run Blackpool and Tory-run Bexley, didn't fix a single pothole or resurface any roads last year. This is according to the RAC. Not a single bit of paper mache went into one of those holes. It comes as campaigners are calling for SUV drivers to pay more tax, or even more, to help fund road repairs. The group Clean Cities says larger cars not only damage roads but also pose a greater risk to pedestrians and cyclists. They point out that over 1.2 million SUVs wider than 1.8 metres were sold in the UK last year and are urging the government to increase parking fees and taxes for bigger vehicles to encourage the use of smaller, safer cars. Some of those cars are among the safest in the world, by the way. Let's speak with Steve N. Allen, broadcaster, comedian and pothole expert. Steve, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Yes, I would go for the title of potholer, but that's sadly a different thing. You don't want to get those two confused. Although some of the potholes are deep enough, you probably could pothole in them.
I think you probably could. Now, listen, I know you've done a PhD in potholing and all the art and the science behind them. These things don't just show up.
All holes. I'm a specialist.
Indeed, yes. I mean, you started out with crop circles years ago, but then sort of suddenly went from fields to roads, which I understand. It's far more easier to observe, perhaps. But I do find it strange. Well, first, I find it strange that we're talking to you about this, Steve, but, you know, that was our request, so we're glad you are there, because this is... When you and I used to work at a previous radio station, I remember when I had my first meeting with the boss, who, by a bizarre coincidence, I'm about to meet in 20 minutes for a coffee.
Do say hi from me.
I will say hi from you, Steve. I remember saying to him, I will not discuss potholes. I refuse to discuss potholes. And he said, yeah, I get it, but what's your reason? And I said, well, because it's the most boring subject in the world. And it will make me very depressed if I think that the main headline is, you know, more potholes were found on the A25 than any... I can't do it. And he said, all right, OK, we'll give somebody else the pothole stories. But today, here we are, fast forward a few years. It was you, yes, you did the pothole stories too. Fast forward a little bit, and these stories are now everywhere, but they've taken on a whole different tone because they've gone from just being something that, you know, that somebody in Acacia Avenue would moan about in quite an amusing way. Oh, God, you know, stop it, you're getting upset about a little hole in the road, to being an industrial-scale problem in our country.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Surely you feel the passion now. I think this is why you get me on, because in the last 5 years, I've had 3 bent wheels thanks to these things. Yeah. Three flats, 1 bent wheel, where they actually had to go and like hammer the thing back into shape. It's ridiculous, because in the olden days, you're right, they were just small little dips in the road, and there's a bit of grit stuff around them, and you'd moan about it. Whereas now you're driving along and you just hear this bone-shattering dunk noise where you realise, you can just feel it when it's done damage, can't you? Yeah. And the thing is, no one cares. So just 3% of England's roads received any maintenance. Yep. And I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I'd probably presume that those roads, those 3% of roads, are the ones in and out of the council from where the guy who lives, who's in charge of which roads get fixed. Come on, it's a bit suspicious, isn't it? Because the rest of us are left to just suffer. Yeah. And it does depend on the size of your car. I've got 2 cars. One's a big and one's a small. And if I'm driving through a pothole in the small car, there's no getting out of it. It's a journey-ending thud, and then it cost me like a couple of £100 to get stuff fixed, which is 3 times the value of the car. Yeah, it's winding me right up.
It's expensive, of course, car repairs. Nothing ever can. You already have it in your head, don't you, that there's a minimum starting price of £200. Doesn't matter what you're having done. You know, windscreen wiper replacement, £200, mate. It's always going to be in that kind of ballpark somehow. It's interesting that a couple of councils just didn't fix a single pothole or a road. One of them, have you ever gigged in Blackpool, Steve?
Yes, I have, actually. I mean, I'm surprised. I don't think it's the worst area for potholes. Surrey. Whenever I've been driving in Surrey, that's where I've done the most damage. Yeah. Because it's the depth. Look, one solution to this that I put forward is we just stop repairing potholes and hope that they all level out. You know, like the bit of road that is a pothole is a couple of inches lower than the rest. eventually it will just become a road that's 2 inches lower. Every other civilization has built up. You watch Time Team and you have to dig down to their stuff. We will be the only civilization where the surface of our society gets lower because we can't even fix a pothole.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to live in Blackpool, by the way, and I don't remember. I mean, there was a fairly bumpy road on South Shore where you go up and down like a flipping roller coaster. Oh, no, it was a roller coaster. Sorry, that was South Shore's Pleasure Beach. There was areas where I think anybody would agree, like anywhere else, you know, you might have had, you know, a little bit of hassle on a road. I don't remember Blackpool, or for that matter, Bexley, which is fairly nearer where both of us live, which is also apparently another place that didn't fix a single pothole or resurface a road last year.
But I think it's because the cliche of moaning about potholes gets poo-pooed. Not that I'm accusing you of poo-poo, but I think you did a little bit of it. Means that these councils think, oh, we'll just get away with it. And so we should be angry about this because they already have our money to fix things. Road tax used to be called road tax because it was a tax for the road, and then they changed the name so they could just nick the money for other stuff. It used to be hypothecated, which is the fancy word, means ring fencing, but people like to say hypothecated because ring fencing sounds like a very dodgy Olympic sport. So in comparison, we used to just have all that money kept aside to fix the roads. Now that's gone. Now they want to try and do extra tax on big vehicles, which at some point will be sent into the NHS as well. We're being ripped off. The least you can expect as someone who drives on a road and pays for it is to not do in your own vehicle driving on the darn thing.
Well, here's the other thing as well, because this ties in with the story from this campaign group called Clean Cities, who want larger cars to be taxed more. Because the argument goes they're causing more damage and they're less safe for pedestrians and other people. Now, there's two arguments here because they've thrown in the safety thing. In terms of do they create more of a problem on the roads? Well, I mean, it depends which car you... SUV covers a wide range of vehicles. You know, we've all noticed in the last few years fairly standard cars that have just been jacked up a bit so that manufacturers can call them SUVs. And they're not really SUVs in that sense. They're just a slightly taller car. But actually, most of those cars pay more tax anyway. There's already a premium added to bigger vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. There's an argument against the idea that the heavier car causes more road damage because they often have wider wheels, which then means you are applying that force over a greater area, which reduces the pressure, not to get all nerdy science on you. I don't know, I guess you'd have to test it. You'd have to do, you know, like they do emissions testing, they'd have to do like pounds per square inch testing of the vehicle, which means you'd know which ones cause more damage, which ones don't, and which Volkswagens absolutely cheat the system. So, you know, as long as you have some sort of way of measuring it, be all right.
That's true. And I constantly hear as well that one of the problems with electric cars is the weight of them, that they're incredibly heavy. And that's because of the way they're constructed, the engineering and the way the battery, etc., exists, and all the other design considerations around an electric car just make them heavier. So, I mean, you can't just go in and say, oh, because you're driving a big Mercedes or whatever, therefore you're responsible for unleashing hell on the entirety of society.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've not received the latest memo on whether we love or hate electric vehicles anymore, because in the old days, you'd be in a place like this and you're not meant to like them because, well, you know, these newfangled eco people like them. But now Elon likes them and the left wing in America are throwing petrol bombs at them. And by the way,
it's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Don't throw a petrol bomb at an electric car. It's undoing all of the good work of not using any petrol, you fools. At the very least, use like some biofuel. You'd have to call it a Molotov mocktail, but it feels like that'd work. It's a good idea.
Yes, or just some good Waitrose virgin olive oil. You know, would perhaps make the same point. Listen, Steve, it's always great to have you on. Thank you for joining us to discuss this crucial issue of the pothole, which never ever goes away. And I do think, on a serious note, that I feel there's lots of areas of life that are kind of very symbolic, instantly symbolic of the kind of where we're at as a society. And if your health service is knackered, then that tells us straight away that your society is not functioning properly. But I would also say there are others on the list. If you cannot find a road that isn't so knackered that you can't drive down it, we have a problem. I think that it hugely symbolises where we're at in so many different ways. You know, when the Romans were knocking out straight roads back in the day, I don't think if somebody had said to them, yeah, you do realise they're going to have loads of holes in them at some point, they go, no, it doesn't work like it doesn't work like that, they would have said, in their finest Italian. No, they're not meant to have holes in them. They only work if they're straight and, you know, surfaced in some kind of way. But we live in curious times, and there's a cost of living crisis, don't you know, and a pothole is not top of the list of council expenditure. Let's go to Colin in Newport. Colin, on digital ID, how you doing?
Oh, hello there.
Hello.
Yes, I didn't think I was going to be called for a moment because the time went on.
Yeah, that's all right. It sounded like you're in court then for a second when you said you're going to be called. You're in the dock as we speak. What have you got for us, Col?
Shall I turn the sound off, or is that all right?
Yeah, you might as well turn it off, otherwise it'll get confusing because it works in a delay situation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
No, about the digital business.
Yes.
I noticed that the majority of people you spoke to didn't mention the fact that how is this scheme going to be paid for?
Yeah.
I was wondering if it was Tony Blair who might pay for it.
Well, he's got enough money, hasn't he? He could probably pay for it, and everybody would say that's okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, the thing is that people like me who've lived here all my life,
yeah,
and have lived in various. I lived in London. I'm now living in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
People know, you know, the authorities know where I am, but all these migrants have come over. They have, you know, they could use false names and all this sort of stuff. So and the cost of having to chase them up as well.
Yes, because I don't think those people would have a digital ID, would they? They wouldn't buy into it. If you are determined to sort of stay outside of the system, it might be tricky, and it might. Yeah. I don't know how many people would opt not to embrace the system that allows you access to services, but I reckon there'd be a significant amount as a proportion of illegal migrants that would say, I'm still going to stay here, I can still make this work.
Or what they would do is just give a different name every time, and or move out of that hotel they're living in and go to another one.
Quite possibly. I mean, there will be, you know, in the digital world, the world of tech, there is always, you know, counterfeiters and criminals and people that are hell-bent on finding ways to circumnavigate convention or the system, and I don't imagine it would be any different to this. There will be people, you can almost see it now online, you know, right now you can buy a Moody driving licence if you know the right people, and I'm sure there are links that will take you there within about 3 clicks. I'm pretty sure something like this would happen with digital ID, unless, of course, it was a chip that they placed inside of your head.
Oh, don't give them ideas.
No, let's not do that. Colin, thank you very much indeed. Colin in Newport. On equal pay, Brad in Cambridge says, the equal pay in sports thing is really simple for me. It should be market-led. The bigger the audience, the higher the pay. That's how the men's football league works. The Premier League gets more money than the Championship. That's how men and women's sports should work, says Brad. And yeah, there is an argument that says that's fair, isn't it? If you are watching something that gets a greater audience, there is clearly more interest in it. Perhaps sports people would say, look, I didn't come into it for the audience. I came into it to play tennis or whatever squash, whatever the sport might be. But yeah, I mean, if on televised sort of big stuff, if you like, that would certainly be a marker. When you put that to people, certainly when women's football over the last few years the perception of it has completely changed. And that's a great thing for young girls who, you know, my little boys play football on a Saturday. There's a small amount of girls that play, but there are still girls that play, and none of the kids, like my little 6-year-old, doesn't even notice that there's some girls playing in the team that he's playing in. I mean, they're 6, you know. This is not exactly like watching Man City on a field. Well, actually, it is a bit like watching Man City, frankly. Wrong example, but you take the point. But yes, I guess you will see more interest in things like women's football. I don't think it's ever going to be up there, though, for lots of different reasons, and that's not a defeatist thing. I just don't think there is the appetite for that, and it's based on nothing more than skill set, strength, performance, you know, ability, etc., that is dictated not by sponsors, not by individuals, not by managers, but by the physicality or the difference in physicality of men and women. I think it's odd. It's just as simple as that. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Joe Biden also introduced very protectionist measures to create jobs in America, create green jobs in America. He said, well, government will give you a grant to buy an electric car as long as it's made in the US.
Right.
And the same with other green bling and stuff. Well, nobody seemed to, accuse him of sort of closing down world trade. But
No.
He was just as protectionist, really, as Donald Trump.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Scott says, Collins, we don't care, for the love of God. Just tell us who the mystery voice is. I can't take it anymore, says Scott in Dorset. These things can go on for... When I was a kid, there was a radio presenter called John Dunn. This guy was just superb. He was just a very smooth, sort of older generational presenter on Radio 2 that did the Drive Time show. But my dad used to like listening to it, but he had the mystery voice feature. This is back, 40 years. So, and I remember thinking, this is great. This is what a great, and it was an appointment to listen, because you never really heard that kind of stuff back then. It was always interesting, and he'd have two people on to have a guess, and he would chat to them on air, and then they would guess, and then they would win, I don't know, a mug and some other goodies or something. And it was incredible, but some of them would go on for weeks and weeks and weeks without anybody getting it right. So I'm just telling you that, Scott in Dorset, so you can be prepared for another couple of weeks of this one rumbling on. Let's go back to your calls. Charlie is in East Sussex. How are you doing, Charlie?
I'm very well, Ian. Thank you very much indeed.
Good. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, look, I've got a passport, I've got a driving licence, so people know who I am if they need to see it. I bought a pair of Skechers slip-ins the other day, so people can track that, and they know that, number one, I don't want to do my shoelaces up. So, when you're looking at ID cards, digital ID cards, it's not about really, I don't think, about who's going to get them, who's going to... It's about who could possibly get a digital ID card. Now, if you haven't got a passport and you haven't got a driving licence, there are other forms of identification. But if you come to this country without those forms of identification, the easiest way to identify you is to give you an ID card, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, that's my... Look, I know it sounds a little bit conspiracy theory, but it would make it so much easier for whoever's in power to say, well, yeah, we know these people, we know who's coming in. So that's just one aspect of it that I thought about. And I think, when you look at how our lives are digitally governed, when you go into a coffee shop, you show your app to get your free drink after you.
All of that.
So look, everybody knows who you are, where you are. If you've got none of that, if you haven't got a digital footprint, or you want to get rid of your old digital footprint, what better way than to have a brand new digital ID card in the UK?
That's very true. I mean, it would be argued, Charlie, that this is just the direction of travel, isn't it? I mean, in the world we live in, this was always going to happen with the digital world.
I think you are right, but I think also there has to come a time where we say, as a people, how much do really we want the state knowing what we're doing, what we're spending, where we're going, what we're spending our money on, who we're spending our money on? There's already that trail out there. So I'm even when I go and charge my electric car up, you can see that I've charged my electric car up. Yeah. There's so much information.
Well, as I was going to say, I didn't realise that until quite recently. But the electric car charging, obviously, you're aware of this, Charlie, does crunch a lot of numbers when somebody is charging their vehicle.
Absolutely. So when people say, your green footprint has exceeded, whatever it is, or the carbon footprint, you can see that. Hold on a minute, they could turn all this off in just an instant.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whether it's conspiratorial or not, I don't know. Anyway, there you go.
We will see. Charlie, great call. Thank you. Charlie in East Sussex. This from Craig on potholes. How would people stand if they sued the local council for failing to carry out the repairs? If successful, they would soon carry out the repairs. It's a good point. Is there not a reasonable expectation that if you're paying council tax in your area and income tax in the wider sphere, that having decent roads to drive on would be part of the contract, you might think. Rich says there's been 4x4s for decades. The issue is EV and failure by councils and government to surface the roads. And Debbie says they need to levy the EVs. They are massively heavy and too quiet, so a danger to kids. There it is.
The reason I have a 4x4, in fact, two of them, is because I've got so many kids.
That's a good point, isn't it?
Because I just couldn't fit your kids into a normal car.
Yeah.
Are you all right?
I'm all right, yes. You all right?
So I'm in the makeup room and you're doing one of your bits, and I'm going, God, these bloody wires are... And I'm saying, my wife, honestly, I just said to the girls, I said, my wife is obsessed with your voice. And one of the girls who remain anonymous said they were doing something the other day, and all these women were in the building, and they were like, oh my God, that's Ian Collins.
Stop it.
He's just... And you don't handle the compliments very well, do you?
Well, no, they're human. Okay,
that's all breathing.
I'm saying. Yes, it's as simple as that.
So I decided yesterday that it was a tariff-free show, and we ended up doing Boris Johnson being attacked by an ostrich. Did you see that?
Was he?
Yes, he was in the safari park with his child, and the thing put its head through. I think it was a Brexiteer, an anti-Brexit, nipped him, and he went, "Oh!"
I think
it was brilliant.
How did I miss Boris and the ostrich?
You did.
Which sounds like a Netflix show waiting to happen.
It does sound like a Netflix show waiting to happen. So here we are. It's Tuesday afternoon.
It is.
What are we going to talk about? I was noticing your ID thing. I'd prefer to talk about how French officials have been... I mean, have you heard about the road barrier thing?
The gate?
Yes.
Oh, this is beautiful. We didn't get around to talking about that, actually, but it's...
French officials have been blasted for spending British taxpayer cash, yes, your lot, on pathetic road barriers in a bid to stop small boat crossings. I didn't know that boats went down roads. They are aimed at preventing people smugglers, taking boats, motors or life jackets to the beaches. 2 have been installed. They're blow-up ones, which get burst really easily, and they're crap. And we're paying them £500 million a year.
Yes, so they put this barrier there.
Yes.
To stop people taking the boats, presumably on the back of a truck or something, And you think, well, that's a
Or
good
you could
idea.
just turn them away, couldn't
But
you?
then they failed to shut the barrier.
Yeah, in fact, they started
so the
on the beach,
barrier's
so you
open,
get-
so you can just go from dawn
Yeah.
till dusk.
Yes.
You can use the road.
Yeah.
And then after that, they go, better shut the barrier.
Yeah. That did not work so well. And of course, the other big news of the day is that Harry's back in England, missed his father by
Harry's
4 hours,
back.
and her podcast is out.
Is that right?
Madam, I can't. I get into real trouble about her. I think she's awful.
Have you ever
met her?
Yeah, have you ever met her?
No.
Did you ever meet Harry?
Yeah. Lots.
Racing.
Because of the old man. Listen, I very early on in this building, I made my position clear. I don't have a problem. I didn't have a problem with him.